Hey guys, tonight we sit with a warm lamp-breathing honeyed light over papyrus while briny night air slips through a stone window and combs the edges of a quiet Athenian room. Your elbow grazes cool limestone, your knees remember stairs you didn't climb, and a little bowl of olives glistens with the kind of self-confidence only olives possess. You listen to the street donkeys with patient hooves, a wheel murmuring over dust, and you imagine a very real voyage out into black Atlantic water with questionable rations and even more questionable navigation skills. Honestly, you probably wouldn't survive without a better jacket and the ability to tie at least 3 knots. So we'll keep this expedition comfortably imaginary. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're listening from and what your local time is. I love picturing this little fleet of sleepy harbors around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. A wick's halo trembles, and the lamp practices a tiny tide across the papyrus. The ripple moves like breath, like someone smoothing linen with a single finger, and you feel the room lean softer. You hover your hand just above the margin. Good job. No smudging tonight, and let the texture rise to meet your skin. Reed fibers pressed by patient hands, rough as dried river grass. A reed pen rests in a shallow dish, like a sleeping fish. Its tip holds a bead of brown ink and very good intentions. Across the table, a philosopher's voice curls toward the rafters and back again, as if words prefer to make a small loop before they land. And you listen the way you listen to a fan when it finds its calm metronome. Plato speaks, careful and unhurried. A mason setting stones. Mainstream fact. Placed gently in the 4th century BCE, he composes 2 dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, that dress an island power in full story for the first time, beyond the pillars of Heracles, flourishing in rings of land and water, and then gone in a single day and night. A sentence long enough to make the lamp sigh. You shift, and the bench answers with a friendly creak. The air tastes faintly of olives and warm wax, and since this is a sleep story, you exercise heroic restraint and award yourself 0 olives, which counts as a major life event at this hour. Plato's hands move like lake wind, small, convincing ripples, and the dialogue becomes a room inside the room. Solon sitting with Egyptian priests at Sais. Ledgers older than Athens warming the margins. Measures recited in voices that know the weight of years. You can almost feel a scribe's papyrus rasp under a thumb as numbers land. Historians still argue whether Plato intends you to read this island as a moral fable about pride, Athens opposite a too-rich empire, or as a memory blurred by retelling, perhaps carrying real ash from real disasters woven into a pretty speech. They also tug at the geography, whether the pillars here really fix to Gibraltar, and at the arithmetic, whether that dramatic 9,000 years owes something to translation hiccups, like months wearing tall shoes and pretending to be years. The debates move through the doorway like cooler air, touching your neck, and then behaving. A moth edits the lamp once and drifts away, ancient moderation policy at work, and you find your first soft joke loosening like a knot. If the Academy had a Wi-Fi password, it would be forms and good, all lowercase, and Plato would pretend capitalization is a tyrant we need not obey. The rafters do not laugh, but the ink bead on the pen brightens a little, which is encouragement enough. You lean your ear toward the cadence and hear familiar anchors settle into the sentence, a city engineered in rings, a harbor bright as a coin tray, metals with glamorous names, one later called orichalcum, that catch the lamplight and set it marching along temple walls. The lamp obliges by marching its ripple across the parchment. Your breath obliges by matching the pattern, and suddenly the room's air and your chest and the imaginary canal system all keep time, like courteous neighbors who share a wall. Less attested whisper. Set carefully on a side shelf, a Renaissance collector once claimed he saw a sketch from Plato's own hand of ringed harbors, a drawing now lost and cited in a letter that historians eye the way a cat eyes a wobbly shelf charming. Unverified. You place that rumor beside another small pet idea, the one where a medieval copyist supposedly nodded off over Critias and woke to scrawl, "This tale sank me," which is not in any sober index but feels spiritually accurate to anyone who is studied by lamplight. Your lamp, delighted to be part of a tradition, performs two very professional ripples. Plato pauses to sip watered wine, and you notice his fingernails shaded dark at the beds. Calluses of thought, where ink has made itself at home. The pen's green shaft gleams mossy in the low light. The papyrus edge rasps when the roll is adjusted, a sound exactly like sand under a gentle tide. Your second soft joke arrives right on cue. If ancient libraries had track changes, philosophers would still be arguing about whether the line should read "city sinks" or "city gracefully retires," and the cat on duty would click resolve with one indifferent paw. The room allows the quietest smile. The lamp steadies, and with it, you do. You trace a margin crease with one fingertip, the same way you once smoothed a map on your own bedside table, the map that pretended to ripple like water when your lamp practiced its tide, and you feel the worlds fold politely together, your fans hush, becoming this oil smoke breath, your cotton blankets cool, becoming this stone bench's patience. The story asks you to sit just off-center, where echoes like to visit. You sit. Mainstream detail returns, folded into the calm within the dialogues. Athens faces the island across the sea. Virtue faces power. The lesson wears sea cloak and ceremony. And then the manuscript we possess simply stops as if a hand, mid-sentence, set down the pen to sleep and never took it up again. Cretias breaks without a period. The missing ending behaves like an open door in a warm night. You could close it, but the air is better if you let it stand. Historians still argue whether those missing pages ever existed, perhaps a planned finale, or whether the fragment we have is exactly how Plato left it, a deliberate hush. They also debate whether any earlier disaster, Théra's Bronze Age eruption, often earns a cameo stood behind the story like a discreet extra lending shadow, without requiring credit. You do not referee. You listen for how the arguments themselves help you breathe slower, as if scholarly sentences were a kind of lullaby for curious minds. The olives continue to glisten with tailored smugness. You compromise by leaning in only to smell them briny and green, like shade made edible, and your self-awarded PhD in not touching fragile scrolls or snacks remains in good standing. Outside, someone laughs. The laugh of a person who has found excellent figs and intends to brag politely to any open window. Inside, the cat that is probably here but you haven't seen. It yet changes positions invisibly, because that is cat law. You let the room's inventory become familiar shelves with knots of string cinching rolls, a jar with sand settled in microstrata at the bottom, a tiny classroom in a pot, a small dish where the pen sleeps its minute-long naps. You notice a quick tally in the margin amphorae, perhaps, or a copious practice flourish, like the universe writing by more oil beside a paragraph about empires. Your third soft joke pads in wearing slippers somewhere, centuries from now. A scholar pores over your grocery list and writes, "Note the recurring olives. The author favors brine as a theme." Plato resumes. He lets the cadence slow and lowers his hand as if the room is small and must be addressed gently. You feel the sentence lengthen, vowels stretching like sails catching evening breeze. The lamp, pleased, lays another tide across the page. You hold very still, so your hand's shadow won't cross the line where the words decide to become more map than mirror, more posture than pin. You can use that lesson later. You tell yourself maybe even tonight, when the door closes and the fan takes over as narrator. The streets outside unspool into quieter feet. The window remembers cooler air. The limestone drinks the heat it borrowed from day. You could swear the distant harbor gave one true note, or the bell simply lives in your head now. Tidily, on time, you forgive the story for what it withholds: endings, coordinates, absolute proofs, and find in that forgiveness exactly the gentle space you came for. Your shoulders lower, one breath's thickness. The pen makes a final courtesy on the test line. The moth goes about its business. When you finally rise, it's without scraping the bench. The papyrus keeps its river rustle. The lamp keeps its kindly tide. The olives keep their smug secrets. You leave nothing behind but a smooth place where your sleeve warmed the air. A little Aegean of comfort suspended over the page. On the threshold, cooler night steps into your lungs like a well-behaved guest. You carry forward almost nothing, only the scent of warmed wax and a single clear sentence that knows how to end without closing too hard. Somewhere, in another century, your bedside lamp, willing understudy, practices the ripple again, and you let the echo lead you down the hall, under the fan, toward the next quiet. You step out into the Athenian night, and it cups your cheeks with cool, stone-scented air. The lane remembers warm daylight the way a bench remembers a reader, and as you walk, the little metronome you borrowed from the donkey's clip. Breathe, clip. Breathe finds its pace inside your ribs again. Down toward the harbor. Tar leans into brine, and a mast ticks a shy rhythm against a yard. Cousin to the lamp's ripple that still lives behind your eyes. You drift toward the water the way a thought drifts toward sleep. Not with urgency, just with gravity. At the quay, ropes wear their salt like frost. You run a cautious finger along one and feel crusted crystals nip your skin. Tiny and polite. Your ambitious knot certification requests a field test, so you loop a loose coil the way the scribe looped letters. then tuck the tail under as if the rope were a scroll that deserved a tidy closure. It holds, which is today's first small triumph and joke won somewhere. An examiner stamps your imaginary license. Harbor knots passable. Do not show off. The boat approves by rising and settling in place. A mild curtsy. Out beyond the black edge, stars rinse themselves down to a dim ember blue, and the day's crowds have been traded for voices the water likes to keep oarlocks far off. A fish's soft punctuation, the one chime from the bell that seems to follow your route through centuries with perfect timing. You lean on the rail and remember the philosopher's room you left the papyrus grain, the moth's editorial pass, the unhurried fingers that set Atlantis on the table like a cup, and now the cup is a bay, and the table is the world. Mainstream fact, set carefully as a lantern long after Plato is gone. The story keeps walking, a friend told to friends. Plutarch, writing centuries later, says Solon meant to make a great poem out of the tale he heard in Egypt, but never finished. A sleepy echo of the way Critias itself breaks off mid-thought, that sense of an ending walking away without slamming the door, the drawer sliding in with no click, feels right on a night when the sea practices ellipses under your feet. You let the curve of the rail guide your palm as if it were the ring of a harbor in miniature, the way your stone from the desert fit your hand like a chalk moon. The boat breathes. A gull, somewhere, contributes that surprised baby cry you heard on the Aegean night, and because you are generous, you mark it as applause. A sailor pads past, checks the mast tie you admired, and offers the indulgent nod professionals give to enthusiastic amateurs who have not, in fact, caused a catastrophe. You take the win. Historians still argue whether the earliest readers around Plato took the island literally or as a set piece for thinking Aristotle is often cast as the skeptic in later tradition, with a dry aside that the author who invented the island also erased it. Though the line's exact parentage and path are debated in footnotes thick enough to be used as coasters, they also lean toward and away from geography, whether those pillars must be Gibraltar in this telling, or whether the phrase could flex with context the way a tide flexes a rope. You let the argument move like the water around the hull forward, back, nothing capsizing, everyone calmer for having rocked. You imagine the room at the academy again, but now in night air students stepping into the grove after hearing Timaeus. Voices threaded with the kind of excitement that sounds almost sleepy because it's new in the bones. One of them, you decide gently, would be the sort who collects rumors and polishes them for company. And in your pocket of less attested delights, you place a famous morsel quoted later by Proclus that Plato's own student Crantor supposedly traveled, or at least inquired after Sais, and was told of pillars with inscriptions that confirmed Solon's story. Charming, contested, carried to us by a philosopher who loved commentaries, so you keep it, not as a proof, but as the kind of library whisper that lives neatly between shelves. You look west into the heavier dark, where the open sea begins, and think of navigators who decades later will draw the Mediterranean with crisp Port-Aland lines that look like spider silk, anchored to compass roses. Your lamp at home traced a small sea across your blanket. Now the moon sketches a long stitch across the harbor and pulls it snug, loosens, then pulls again. You breathe to that thread. A boy shuffles past with a wicker basket full of folded nets. The medieval prop vocabulary sneaking in centuries early because some tools ignore calendars. You nod to his seriousness and decide he would also excel at not touching olives. Facts. Again, set down with a quiet voice when ancient writers say, Pillars of Heracles. They often mean the Narrows at Gibraltar. Ships do pass beyond. But for many mainland readers, the strait is a line that divides familiar sea from storied ocean. You think of that boundary like the door frame you paused under in Plato's room. One step and the temperature changes a degree. One phrase and the map's tone deepens by a shade. The sea doesn't care. It breathes through both rooms. The boat noses along the mole, and you pass fishermen debating bait with scholarly gravity. One holds up a small drum, a real one, not an instrument, and taps its rim with a finger, as if that will persuade the fish inside to volunteer. Joke 2 arrives, stifling a grin if fish requested music. You suppose they would ask for ambient orlocks. Extended mix, because rhythm is free in this town. A cat, the color of warm stone, performs a figure 8 around your ankle, which is peer review. You are approved for extended listening. In the privacy of your breath, the dialogue returns Solon in Says. Two cultures borrowing each other's shelves for an evening, and you let the picture widen until it finds a coastline farther south and a fan of mouths where a river writes itself into the sea. You don't name Heracleion yet. The story will do its own naming later, for now you hold on to the sensation of channels and thresholds, barges and lamps. A city that will someday learn new breathing. A harbor is practice for that, the calm at the edge of movement. You turn the desert stone in your palm and it gives back a little cached heat, memory, and night exchange pleasantries. The chalky oval sits beside a new truth. Most of what people know about Atlantis for a very long time is still this pair of dialogues and the echo chamber of interpreters, some insisting on parable, some pointing past the pillars and dreaming cartography into oceans with ink that takes its time to dry. A breeze stitches cinnamony thread into the tar smell your traveling rumor with impeccable attendance, and because you are now superstitious in a friendly way, you count it as the evening checking in on schedule. Another sailor knots a line near you with a motion so tidy it looks like handwriting. Your fingers try to copy the flourish in the air, and your ambitious knot certification heaves a modest sigh of envy. Joke 3 pads in on quiet pause if the academy had a course called Applied Ropes. You would absolutely audit. Fall asleep in the back row to the sound of creaking piers, and still pass because the final exam is a nap you had already prepared for. The rope, being a rope, refuses to participate in this comedy and simply does its job. The boat eases toward the harbor mouth and pauses, as if asking permission before the next sentence. You remember the feathering ash you felt on your lashes in a different telling, and the dog-eared maps that put islands where confidence wanted them. You remember Bimini's warm stone and the way right angles flirted with your brain. They will return in their time. Like a bell's echo you can almost predict now. For the moment, your job is to listen to how classical Athens lowers its voice so the ocean can speak. A companion leans on the rail nearby. Call him an old reader who has walked the same streets and mentions, in a voice almost too drowsy to carry, that later geographers like Strabo will talk about shoals and mud beyond the pillars, as if a great fall of land had left silt to hinder keels. You nod, because that image of interference feels like the lamp's tide dragged across the page lovely, and also a reminder that light sometimes pools where you meant it to stream, consensus or not. Details like these are little scallops on a bigger shell. You run a finger along the edge and feel the curve. You think about the fragment again, the broken Critias, and forgive it a second time tonight because you are practicing that kind of forgiveness on purpose. Endings that leave room for air are the ones that let you sleep. And this series, this whole long modern game of maybe there, maybe not, is really a laboratory for learning soft conclusions, not a verdict, a posture. You take another breath and move the stone from hand to pocket, as if putting a final period on a paragraph aloud. A lantern washes the pier in a thin lacquer. The water under it looks like hammered leaf gold, laid over black oak, rippled by a gentle hand. You study how the gleam climbs and falls over the pilings, and understand suddenly why orichalcum felt so convincing in Plato's list of metallurgies. The mind likes metals that tell stories when the light moves. It is not proof. It is simply a good reason to enjoy the sentence you're in. The bell faithful, unhurried, gives its single note. You let it run through you like a seam of bright metal through dark stone. Across the quay, someone shuts a door with librarian tact. You decide not to go to sea just yet. You decide instead to keep the pier as your classroom and the tide as your professor. The lesson tonight is that a story can be a harbor, a place that holds arrivals and departures without scolding either for being what they are. By the time you straighten, the rope has drawn a soft print into your palm, a line you could read like a favorable omen or a reminder to moisturize. You choose omen because bedtime stories are better that way. You step back from the edge the way you step back from the papyrus, not to leave, only to stand at a distance where the whole line is visible. The sea exhales, vast and kind, and you let the breath take yours with it, slow and even, like oars dipping in time toward an island that belongs, for now, mostly to sentences. You step into a cooler darkness where stone remembers river wind, and the courtyard at Sais unrolls like a shadowed fan, lotus pools holding sky, columns wearing pale bands of moon, a hush that smooths your shoulders the way the lamp's ripple smoothed your blanket. Linen brushes linen, reed mats sigh under sandals. Somewhere in the colonnade, a tiny oil lamp gives that polite flutter you now recognize as the ancient version of clearing one's throat. You breathe the room's temperature chalk and water, a sweet hint of crushed lotus, and the night breathes back, unhurried. A priest waves you forward with a hand that might as well be a bookmark. The gesture says, "Here is the next page." You take it slowly, letting the groove of hieroglyphs under your palm register as texture, only no puncturing. Remember, and you feel the same respectful restraint you learned around olives and papyrus in Athens. Wicker baskets wait against a wall, reeds stitch so neatly they look embroidered. You admire their patience and decide that if baskets could teach a seminar, It would be called carrying quietly. Joke 1 arrives as a whisper you keep to yourself. The temple late fee jar must be shaped like a crocodile, an excellent deterrent to overdue scrolls. Mainstream fact. Set down with temple calm, Sais is a real city of the western Nile Delta, long dedicated to the goddess Neith, whom Greeks often link with Athena in Timaeus and Critias. Plato has Solon's 6th century BCE lawgiver of Athens hearing from Egyptian priests at Sais about a mighty island power beyond the pillars of Heracles that fell in a single day and night. You let the statement rest, the way a scribe lets a new line dry, unforced, exact, anchored by the smell of lamp oil and the faint grain of the floor under your soles. You feel your private metronome find its seat again, the courteous vent fan of the temple matching the donkey's rhythm from Athens and the oarlocks from the quay. On a low table, a reed pen sleeps with its tip dark, and you smile at the coincidence that follows you like a friendly superstition, a thread of cinnamon, just a breath. Rides the air from some celebrant's pocket sachet, the same traveling rumor from Santorini that insists on attending every appointment. You raise 2 fingers in greeting to the unseen spice and keep listening. A priest with a voice like smoothed sandstone does not hurry. He lays out a lineage of knowing. A little procession you can see in the mind old ledgers kept when Greek cities were young. Floods counted, rains tallied, stories stored like carefully folded linen. He doesn't sell you proof. He sets the bowl down and lets you see the water shine. In the telling, the great city beyond the pillars acquires its rings land. Water. Land its metals bright as sunrise, its channels like bracelets, its pride like a tower's shadow. The lines flow the way the Nile does rounded corners. Wider truths, and you can almost feel the column of the hall lean in to hear. Historians still argue whether Solon really visited Egypt just this way and heard just this story, and whether Egyptian records ever housed a tale that maps so neatly onto Plato's later architecture, or whether the priests of Sais are literary figures built to carry a lesson home in Solon's pocket. They also tug at the number that shines like a coin in the narration, 9,000 years before Solon, asking if that is an Egyptian way of counting or a Greek way of glossing, and whether a stray conversion somewhere gave the story extra centuries for drama. You watch the debate move like breeze over lotus leaves, ripple, smooth, ripple, smooth. The night is generous with texture. Hieroglyphs cut shallowly into stone keep their crispness in the sidelight. A fine brown outline in the mind your favorite manuscript trick, reinvented in limestone. Farther back, a door frame holds cooler air, as if the threshold were a clay cup. You stand in it and sip a degree of relief. An attendant passes with a wooden bucket that smells faintly of river. He smiles the professional smile of someone who knows where everything is kept, including your questions. Less attested delight, placed gently in the maybe cabinet you now carry like a travel set. Much later writers tell that the priest who spoke to Solon had a name, Sonchis of Sais, and that he showed pillars inscribed with ancient accounts to visitors who asked very courteously. Some philosophers in late antiquity even say a student of Plato named Crantor went to Egypt, or at least investigated and heard confirmation. It is charming, unverified, and it purrs in the mind the way the Alexandria cat did by the lamp, companionable, not decisive. You walk the periphery while the voice translates centuries into sentences. In a side room, bundles of papyrus stand like thin, polite soldiers. A folded textile rests near them with a border of neat blue chevrons that catch your eye the way compass roses did at the chart table. You keep your hands to yourself. Your PhD in not touching remains active, and you do the safer, softer thing, which is to inventory smells ink like a wet twig, gum Arabic like a ghost of honey, stone like a clean, cool plate. Joke 2 lifts its head if temples had Wi-Fi. The password here would be "We have receipts," all lowercase. And you forgive yourself for the modernism because even the gods sometimes enjoy a pun. The priest pauses to let a candle breathe, and you hear from the street a donkey's measured remark, so precise you could use it to calibrate your pulse. You smile because the world loves a motif. You have been hearing this rhythm long enough to trust it. Close to your ear, the faintest chime one, and done finds its way through the stone the way it found you on the pier. And because you are kind to yourself, you accept it as punctuation rather than evidence. The story is doing what stories do, breathing with the room that holds it. He resumes, and in the next turn of phrase, the island grows its fleet and its manners. There is feasting, there is tribute, there is a proud, precise way of building causeways. You imagine door-sill measurements done with cords and pegs, and bridges that admire their reflections. Then, because contrast is the most ancient stagecraft, he unthreads it: day, night, sea, silence. You feel that missing ending, the way your fingers felt the smooth knee of a granite god. Underwater, the edge is there, but it declines to cut. It simply persuades you to lean closer and lower your voice. A novice brings a small tray and sets down watered wine in shallow, golden bowls. You lift, sip, and taste something like river sun rinsed through cool clay. The tray bears a little engraving of Neith. Her bow curves the way the moon does over the courtyard pool. You return the bowl with exaggerated care and count it as joke 3 when the novice gives you the same indulgent half-smile as the harbor sailor did after your rope exam. You are now officially licensed for ceremonial sipping. Beginner level. The consensus facts stack quietly like papyrus slips. Solon is a real Athenian lawgiver of the early 6th century BCE. Sais is the genuine Delta city he supposedly visited. In Plato's work, those priests carry a memory Athens did not, or said they did. The island lies beyond the pillars. A phrase that points most commonly toward Gibraltar. That is enough to build a room of thought in which the breeze is allowed to pass, and you do not keep the door shut against it. The hall approves by staying cool. On your way back across the courtyard, you pause by a pool that keeps a disciplined circle of stars. The reflection is so crisp you think of the desert rings again, the eye blinking under sun, and of your chalky oval stone that still rides in your pocket. Warm against your thigh, you take it out, not to lift toward worship, only to let its stored heat pass into your fingers before the night asks you to give it back. The transfer is small and perfect, like a well-tied knot that needs no showy tug. You file one last soft rumor where it belongs alongside the cinnamon, the drowned plaza bell, The sleeper scribe's sheepish note that this tale sank me a whispered claim that somewhere under sighs a cache of stone fragments once held a drawing of ringed harbors from a hand nobody dared attribute, and that later centuries lost to careful flood or careless shovel. Charming, unverified, you don't need it, but it tastes like inked air, and the room lets you enjoy the aftertaste without promising a refill. When you step out past the pylons, the Delta night sits up with you for a moment, frogs in the canals auditioning, palms tiding their silhouettes, a sail snagging moonlight down the lane like a folded letter. You recognize the long, slow exhale of a tide you cannot see, only feel in your knees. The bell somewhere, always somewhere, gives its one respectful note, and you let it pass straight through to your feet. The path under you isn't a verdict. It is an invitation to keep walking without waking the sand. The river breathes. You match it. And the city of sighs returns the favor by making room in your ribs for its own hush. The way forward is nothing theatrical, just a narrow street, a cool wall, a cat with priorities, a novice hiding a yawn as neatly as a bookmark. You smile a small approval at the night's housekeeping, then carry the bowl of the story steady, full, unspilled toward the next room, where you will set it down like a lamp and watch the ripple find the edges you didn't know you needed to see. You walk down to a quay rinsed in starlight, and the boards breathe their saved heat into your souls as a low, good-tempered sea slides under them with the same patient metronome you learned from donkeys in Athens. You're steady enough that your shoulders unclench by instinct. A lantern near the stern does your favorite party trick, sending a small gold ripple across coil and cleat so precisely that you can almost hear your lamp at home applauding from across centuries. Tar and rope make their honest perfume. A thread of contraband cinnamon sneaks out of somebody's pocket tin again, proving it has stowed away on this whole trip like a polite superstition that pays its own fare. You are not the helmsman. Everyone relaxes visibly, but you are invited to share the cool midnight with people who are. They glance up in the unhurried rhythm of professionals and mark their points the sturdy prick of the North Star, the Dipper's easy arc, a sprinkling of faint lights that look like someone shook a salt cellar across silk. You imitate their checks the way you once imitated a scribe's calm line by line. No hurry, and your reward is that little shiver that says you could find shore with nothing but sky and breath if you had to. You adjust the line at your feet into an ambitious knot that aspires to competence. For joke one, you promote it to maritime adjacent shoelace, and the boat kindly fails to object. The bow eases into open water, and low islands drift by like sleeping animals. Kea, Kithnos, Seraphos, names that feel like seeds when you roll them in your mouth. Off to port, darker against dark, sits Melos, where obsidian once left in careful hands for places far past a single horizon. Mainstream fact. Set down quiet as a star, the Aegean has been a trade web since deep prehistory, and Melian obsidian, glassy and black, turns up far from Melos in Neolithic and Bronze Age sites. Proof of lanes and promises older than most stories. The helmsman taps the tiller twice, a little ritual like a librarian straightening a page. And you return the gesture by breathing in time. The sail fattens, The oarlocks stop their polite talk. The wake scribbles a note only to erase it. Editor C keeping a tidy desk. In the dark behind the mast, a gull makes that surprised baby cry you now recognize from other nights. You laugh softly into your collar so as not to wake the gull's self-respect. Someone passes a cup whose watered wine tastes like clean clay and grapes with good manners. You set it down in a shadow of net and listen to the hull answer the small chop with a cousin of your favorite clonk. A reassurance you feel under the skin like a cat purring under a table. A head and a little right. The idea of Crete gathers not as a line but as a temperature. The night grows fractionally less empty in that direction. You picture courts open to air and light, red columns on pale stone, stairs that seem to prefer going up forever. Another crisp fact settles beside your ankle like a coiled rope. Here flourished the Minoan civilization, centered on Crete from roughly 2000 to 1450 BCE, with palace complexes such as Knossos, Phaistos, and Malea. Their administrative script we call Linear A remains undeciphered groceries the planet filed without leaving a key. The thought sits like a sealed jar on a shelf, not urgent, wonderfully real, oddly restful. The breeze ebbs. The oarlocks take one turn on the metronome and then yield again to the cloth. You borrow the helmsman's posture, knees loose, eyes undramatic, and practice letting the rest of the world be big without requiring your commentary. The deck keeps a tally of salt crystals on your sleeve like stars you can taste. The line of the horizon is a suggestion in ink. Below it, something that could be dolphin or fancy wave shows a brief arc. The crewman nearest you keeps his voice low and tells about a companion that played at the bow all morning as if the ship were a friendly whale. Historians still argue whether the Minoans held a true thalassocracy, an organized sea power that policed these lanes, or whether their influence looked more like a dense and persuasive network of trade, gift exchange, and prestige that did much of the same work without flags and patrols. They also debate how much the relative lack of big outer walls at Cretan palaces means peace, confidence, or simply defenses made of other choices now erased by time. You let those questions drift alongside like bright fish. Welcome company you don't need to catch. A coil of rope unwinds with a smell like summer laundry and hemp. You like it more than you expect, and consider a cologne called Eau de Harbor, noting that you would buy it for every aunt with a beach house. Joke 2 arrives on cue when the helmsman mutters to the boat the way people talk to houseplants, good girl. Hold the line, and the boat, being a professional, complies. The sail shows faint constellation freckles where starlight sifts through the weave, and you put your palm to the cloth to feel the rough bakery towel texture kissed with salt. The Cyclades arrange themselves like beads on a string. You don't have to count Peros to starboard, Naxos heavier and cat-like, intent on continuing to be Naxos. You brush your sleeve and taste the tiny crystals. In your head, you unfold a dolphin fresco you saw in a book and place it back again with the same care you used on a scroll margin in Athens. Someone hums a tune learned from a grandmother on Naxos, or perhaps from the sea itself. The boat harmonizes with wood and rope. Far ahead, somewhere east where night is thicker, A low circle of darker dark suggests a mountain that once had louder things to say. You do not name it yet. For now, the job is simple and good. Watch how a mast lines up with a star and how the boat shifts so the line returns. Feel the little decisions that keep long journeys true. Your breath falls into that old, reliable cadence. You hear your room fan at home agreeing across time. The lamp's ripple in memory keeps approving. Less attested boatyard lore swims in for a minute and rests its chin on the rail on glassy nights near the port of Amnisos. Some swear they've heard a low drumming under the water, as if caves in the cliffs were beating time for fish. The island practicing its favorite bull myth on a small and private scale. Charming, unverified. You tuck it into the same pocket as your drowned plaza bell and the cinnamon wind rumor, and let it warm the air by 1 degree. A sailor near the mast chalks a little star onto the deck and taps it with his toe. Navigation or luck maintenance. He leaves you to decide. You try a very quiet joke 3. If ancient GPS needed customer support, it would be a long flute solo of crickets, and the helmsman would nod as if a wise ant had spoken. The crickets in the rigging seem to applaud with good sportsmanship. Wind returns cooler, a thread pulled across your neck, and the sail answers with one thwap, like a soft book closing chapter break. Not crisis. A story about caves near Knossos that bellow in certain winds makes the rounds locals call them the bulls, which fits a myth too neatly to trust, and yet pleases the night all the same. You put your palm on the rail and feel the wood's agreeable hum, the same way you felt a temple's hush at Sais travel up your bones as something factual and oddly friendly. A darker shoulder becomes a line, becomes a shore, becomes the feeling your chest translates as we are arriving. You don't rush it. You let the island come to you the way sleep approaches when you stop auditioning for it. The helmsman stands taller. The tiller speaks in a faint wooden dialect you're beginning to understand. You adjust your very ambitious knot the smallest amount and accept its claim to adulthood. Near the bow, a gull practices the surprised baby cry once more, and night, polite as ever, files it next to oarlocks and bells. Your mind stretches to touch 2 thoughts at once without tearing courts and storerooms on land, boats and wakes on water. The first grows olives. The second resists eating them near papyrus. You congratulate yourself for restraint on all shores and, as a small reward, inhale a breath that tastes faintly of resin and a memory of figs being bragged about somewhere down a lane. You picture a storeroom seal pressed onto wet clay, a tidy autograph, and try not to feel too proud of your own tidy rope work. By the time the first harbor lantern shakes out its tame gold in a notch of coast, your pulse has accepted its proper job description: keep time, not score. A bell gives one note that belongs to the same family as all your bells: the dock in the green-brown bay, the little church above Black Rock. The idea of a drowned plaza that may never have existed and still improve the story. You let that note step lightly through your ribs and take a seat. The boat noses toward its berth, and the world narrows to useful choreography: line, cleat, loop, foot, plank, steady. The helmsman slides you a look that says you may, if you like, show off the signature knot you've been practicing since the Athens room. You tie it in one calm sequence, over, under, through, and it holds like a thought you don't have to defend. On shore, a dog yawns once and decides to approve of everything. Tonight's lesson arrives without posture. Trade routes are habits as much as lines, and islands learn to speak to each other in goods and songs long before they send envoys. The water erases your little wake as politely as ever, and you accept that erasure as praise, no drama, just rhythm. Above you, stars accept their demotion to simple bright dots because it means you will sleep better. You thank them by looking and then looking away. The island waits at the edge of the lamplight, enormous and unhurried, and you feel the urge to whisper, not because anyone will wake, but because this kind of arrival is a quiet art. You gather up the cinnamon rumor, the donkey metronome, the lamp ripple, the cat-level restraint, and the knot you keep trying to perfect, and you carry them all down the gangplank the way you would carry a shallow golden bowl, steady, careful, pleased to leave no splash. You step from the Cretan quay into a morning that still tastes like stars, and the planks give your feet that last stored sigh of heat before handing you back to the boat, which answers with a single approving clunk cousin to the ones you've collected from Bimini to Alexandria, members of the same friendly family tapping. You're doing fine. The sail lifts. The tiller murmurs. Your breath finds the metronome the donkeys in Athens taught you on night one, and the island eases away behind you like a book you've dog-eared carefully and promised to return to. Ahead, the horizon grows a bruise of pale orange under a thinning band of cloud, and off that bruise a ring rises the crescent of Théra, Santorini in later tongues bitten shape against brightening sky, as if someone took one thoughtful taste of an island and set it back down. Closer, the air shifts to warm stone and faint sulfur, like a bakery where the oven tells old geology jokes between loaves. Low houses step down lanes and tidy terraces. Jars sit on thresholds. A cat kneads the roof of a kiln with the slow gravity of a tiny priest blessing bricks. You follow a narrow street into Akrotiri, where walls are still cool under fingers, and frescoes keep summer indoors, swallows looping, lilies bowing, blue monkeys arguing softly in a language that requires hand gestures. You hover your hand near the paint without touching, the way you hovered over papyrus in the Athens room, the way you let your jar of not tea sit sealed under moonlight. A potter's wheel whispers. Somewhere a loom hums. Sandals make their sand-soft syllables and then stop so the morning can breathe. You reach to accept a proffered olive and remember, heroically, that olives and ancient surfaces are a couple that should never meet. You award yourself restraint points and, for joke 1, name the points ambitious, which is what you call anything you are trying to improve by compliments. The vendor laughs with a mouth like a comma and returns the dish to its doorframe altar. In a courtyard, someone lifts a jar like a planet while a child counts swallows with the solemn authority of a tax official. Heat gathers somewhere far below your sandals, the way a thought gathers in a room before anyone speaks. The sea, usually your metronome, holds perfectly still for half a beat, which somehow makes it louder. Mainstream fact, placed gently like a cup on a table in the middle of the 2nd millennium BCE. The volcano we call Théra erupted on a titanic scale, among the largest in the last few thousand years, driving ash into the stratosphere, sending pumice across seas, likely raising waves that slapped coasts awake. The town at Akrotiri, extraordinary in its timing or its luck, was entombed beneath pumice and ash stairways, jars, wall painting brushstrokes sealed as if an entire morning inhaled and politely never exhaled. You walk that morning its rooms, its careful corners, and feel the breath being held. The first ash arrives as a kindness, soft as talc kissing the backs of your hands. Each blink turns into the turning of a papyrus page. Every touch is a promise to touch less. A cat pauses mid-need and stares at a precise nothing in the way cats do when they're reading barometric pressure. A boy stops with a wicker basket, lifts his head, and listens as if the island has just cleared its throat. Over the far rim, the horizon bulges orange, a slow bruise of light, and on the edge of your tongue, the cinnamon rumor you met in Santorini before returns a faint ribbon. Maybe chemistry, maybe story that seems absurd and pleasing, and somehow exactly the right spice for a day learning to be ash. Wind pulls warm through lanes, and with it a smell like baked clay and something metallic, the world's least popular perfume. You take the air slowly and let it soften in your chest, the way the marsh air at Helix softened once the frogs agreed to take turns. Fine grit clicks on plaster like a courteous knock. A potter steadies a wheel and keeps working, because work is a kind of faith that gives hands a plan when the ground beneath them begins writing its own. You step under a lintel where shade collects and watch dust lift from rafters in a flutter that looks exactly like the wings painted on the walls. Historians still argue whether the eruption's date belongs to the tighter window, 1627 or 1600 BCE, favored by radiocarbon and distant ice cores that seem to keep a weather diary, or to a later slot in the 1500s BCE that fits ceramic chronologies across the eastern Mediterranean. They also wrestle with degrees how much this single cataclysm unseated Cretan power, and how much weight belongs to aftershocks, quakes, and neighbors ready to write their own chapters. You let the debate move like a breeze through a doorway, refreshing, real, not yours to cage and stay with the felt facts' warm grit, the way light turns orange at its edges, the cat's whiskers registering news. On the shore, pumice starts bobbing in like chalk loaves, trial balloons sent by the caldera. A fisherman nudges one back with his foot as if returning a borrowed dish. A woman ties a jar to a donkey with the competence of a person whose knots receive peer review. The donkey accepts the dissertation with one stamp that echoes the Aegean Orloc's old class in rhythm tick. Hush. Tick. For joke 2, you decide to add Director of Knot Studies to your CV. And then, seeing your loop attempt, demote yourself immediately to enthusiastic intern. Less attested lore arrives on a private tide on certain glassy nights. Some sailors swear the caldera breathes a low note you feel more than hear. A bell rung underwater, cousin to your drowned plaza chime. Others, more whimsical, say a cinnamon smell rides down the slopes in winter. Memory of spice jars stored in forgotten warehouses. Charming, unverified. You label both and find that labeling doesn't remove their usefulness. It calibrates them. When you rest your palm on a wall, You imagine you feel that note walk through stone, the way the metronome walked through donkey bones and later through the hull in the Cyclades. Small stones begin landing in the lane with the polite tap of knuckles on wood. The air thickens from veil to curtain, the kind your lamp at home loves to practice with a ripple. Snow, your brain suggests, and then corrects itself mineral, specific, the flavor of rock made into flour. You step into a house and the room becomes blanket fort dim and warm, a kind of audible hush you've come to trust. On a table, a basket of figs wears a dusting that would be fashionable if not for context. You leave them undisturbed because your olive restraint class has general credit. You find a window and look out the way a child peeks at birthday candles before everyone sings. The sky is layers of gray stacked like wool, and behind them something brighter pushes like a lamp behind a sleeve. The village goes velvet, edges become slopes, steps become suggestions. The donkey's ears collect ash like little roofs. A neighbor passes with bundles, laughs once in that human way that admits there are too many feelings for now, and asks if you need anything. You say no, but you take the laugh and set it in your pocket with the cinnamon rumor, your not-tea-jar memory, and the grouper's imaginary behave stamp from Aboukir Bay. Mainstream fact again. In a room that smells like clay and patience, Akrotiri's preservation under ash yields rooms with stacked jars, staircases that lead nowhere now, frescoes vivid enough that swallows seem to have stayed in the building to keep bowing. There are no bodies in the buildings. A silence that suggests warning and time enough to walk away. Though the boats themselves are a different question, the sea keeps to itself. You touch the air over a painted ship with a tufted sail and imagine a helmsman tapping a tiller twice for luck across centuries, habits traveling easier than hulls. The ground speaks a new grammar, long vowel rumble, short consonant shiver, your ankles translating without panic. A pot rolls under your foot, and you catch it with the reflexes you honed, saving a snack bag in another century. For joke 3, you whisper to yourself that if ancient city planning apps had a pop-up for ground behaves like soup, maintenance budgets would be easier to write. The wall declines to laugh, but holds up its end of the bargain by not falling over you. Outside, ash thickens to the kind of hush that makes even footfalls considerate. You walk because walking makes a shape your body understands when the world is changing shapes under it. Neighbors become silhouettes with 4 hands between them, 2 for bundles, 2 for reaching door frames and heads. The lanes fill with the sound of careful rubber soles and the sigh of fabric gathering itself into practical decisions. In a doorway, you watch a bead curtain of dust and think of the bead curtains of rain, the marsh at Helique made out of reeds. Each thin chime teaching you about absence with good manners. At the beach, the water forgets and remembers in quick alternation, delivering pumice like toy boats, taking them back as if indecisive about soup recipes. Warm bands brush your shins and pass like invisible blankets unrolled under the surface. Another sentence your ankles file without needing a committee. A child scoops a shallow bowl and calls it stone stew. You approve the seasoning advice and recommend moderation, which is a polite way to say, don't eat rocks. A sentence you hoped never to have to say. Ash turns the afternoon into an early evening. Lamps in doorways become tiny suns practicing their ripples for your blanket at home. You think of Plato's Critias breaking off mid-sentence and recognize the island writing its own ellipsis in real time, 3 dots made of plume and hush and time. Endings aren't. They pause. Drawers slide most of the way and wait for someone's hand you can't see. You walk back toward the boat that will carry you onward, and each sandal print fills almost before the heel lifts. The sea stitching neat repairs after you. Housekeeping with excellent training. You glance once toward a house where a cat vanished earlier and wish it exactly the naps it requires. At the pier stones that decided to act like a pier, you place your palm on the rail and feel the wood answer in the dialect you've learned from boats. Everywhere we will go when you go. We will stop when you stop. You nod. Gather your ambitious knot where it belongs on a coil, and let the island keep the line of your morning, the way a page keeps the shine of a finger for a minute and then forgets. Kindly, you arrive at dawn on a breath so steady it could have studied with your Athens donkeys. The ship sliding between quiet hulks toward a stone lantern that blinks its eyelid of fire, the Pharaohs, keeping its long promise to guide strangers in with calm hands. Lanterns along the quay, do your favorite trick, small ripples of gold across water. Your bedside lamp's party piece scaled up for a city, while ropes sigh and the hull gives one soft clunk, cousin to the taps you've been collecting across seas. You step onto a cool wharf that smells of brine and new mortar, then into streets where shade pours from colonnades like chilled water. The air tastes faintly of olive smoke, ink, and a pinch of spice that might be someone's contraband cinnamon, insisting it will follow you forever. Within a doorway, the temperature drops to library cool, the kind of stone drink your skin recognizes immediately. Reed pens scratch with the posture of tidy crickets. Sandals whisper over a floor polished by thousands of errands, scholars fetching, scribes returning, apprentices mastering the art of carrying 3 scrolls in one hand, like a waiter with cups. Columns hold the ceiling as if supporting a thought. Your breath matches the room's long exhale, and your shoulders let go of a knot the helmsman would now rate respectable, which for you is a promotion. A cat yawns professionally beside an oil lamp, as though hired to demonstrate proper lamp adjacency. It blinks once at you, stamps your invisible visitor log, behave, and returns to duty. You drift toward a long table where a scribe mends a split roll with paste that smells faintly of flour. The pen's scratch becomes the library's metronome, your donkey clop translated into ink, and every so often the brush lifts, rests, and resumes, like waves taking turns at the key. On shelves, dowels wear tidy title tags like crowns. A tutor murmurs Homer in one alcove. In another, a physician compares notes about a herb that looks exactly like dill and refuses to taste like it. A botanical identity crisis that belongs in the drama section. Mainstream fact, set down gently like a weight that keeps a map from curling. This grand library belongs to the Minoan of Alexandria, a royal research complex founded under the early Ptolemies in the 3rd century BCE. Among its scholars, Callimachus compiles the Pinaikes, vast catalogues of authors and works, while Eratosthenes measures the girth of earth with a stick, a well, and elegant thinking, and teams of translators shape the Greek scriptures later called the Septuagint. Knowledge is not a room here. It's a weather system with excellent manners. You pause at a shelf where brittle edges flake like sea salt papyrus, reminding you of the Athens room, of the flaking you refuse to encourage with eager fingers. Your jar of not tea flashes across your mind, layers settling by gravity. Here, the layers are people and texts, heavy at the bottom with older wisdom, lighter above with very fresh arguments. A clerk passes carrying a wicker basket of scrolls as if it were bread, still warm from thought. You lean closer to a margin where a copyist has tested a new pen with a row of tiny waves. Ripple, ripple, your lamp's signature turned into ornament. A callback, right where you need it. Joke 1 arrives quietly as you watch a librarian glide past with the unhurried authority of a cat who has edited your diary. You fight the urge to ask about the papyrus decimal system, because while you are proud of your restraint, you also know jokes must be portioned, like olives, and the cat would almost certainly fine you in fish. The librarian adjusts a shutter. Herb-scented air folds in. Somewhere across the eastern harbor, a single bell offers one precise note, your punctuation mark, then declines to make a spectacle of itself. Baskets come from the quay, and officials do something this city has perfected into ritual borrow texts from visiting ships. Copy them, return the copies. Keep the originals for the royal shelves. Ancient sources like to tell this story. You don't frame it as scandal so much as choreography ink, as custom stamp, fidelity as tariff paid in patience. Less attested rumor strolls in, dusting its sandals. Some say a few precious rolls were sealed in clay jars against damp and tucked into cellars near the Serapeum, resurfacing generations later when a mason hoping for amphorae of oil cracked one and discovered dinner would be more intellectual than expected. Charming. Unverified, you give it a shelf in your maybe cabinet beside cinnamon wind, underwater bells, and the groupers damp behave. Through an arch, you find a courtyard where ivy minds itself, and a fountain sketches patient geometry. Two scholars argue amiably about a star list. One wants catalog order by brightness, the other by mythic drama. Orion is a diva and deserves headlines. You contribute nothing but an approving smile calibrated for scholarly climates. And the fountain equals your smile with a microsplash. The wind crosses your cheek with that same soft metronome you've trained to hear everywhere. And you realize you've learned to carry silence like a well-balanced tray. Historians still argue whether the great losses to this library came chiefly during Julius Caesar's Alexandrian War in 48 BCE, when fires leapt from the harbor to nearby storehouses, or whether later centuries did the deeper erasing accidents, neglect, budgets, zealotry, earthquakes that rattled shelves and patience alike. They also tug, sometimes exasperated, at numbers hundreds of thousands of rolls or only tens, and at the roll of the Serapeum's daughter library, which seems to have endured long after the main collection began to thin. You let the debate slide by like a draft between stacks. Here the arguments feel like weather, not verdicts, and you are practicing the art of not refereeing. A young copyist in indigo linen readies a fresh pen, and unable to resist tests it with 3 tiny fish in the margin before commencing serious medicine. You love the moment, a doodle swimming just ahead of knowledge, exactly as parrotfish carpenters ticked at coral ahead of beaches you swam over at Bimini. Joke 2 swims along with it. You imagine a departmental memo about marginalia fauna limits, signed by the head librarian cat with 1 authoritative paw print. The cat, overhearing, relocates to a sunbeam and delivers a purr that passes for peer review. You run your fingers along a practice roll as students exercise, neat columns of letters marching, confident and unimportant enough to be perfect. Mainstream fact, thumbed softly. Papyrus is river plant slices crossed and pressed sturdy in desert cupboards. Vulnerable to damp. A city whose breath is half Nile and half sea must fight for every word it keeps. Somewhere beneath these streets, later centuries will surrender statues and colonnades to divers, palaces sleeping in green light. The sea loves archiving as much as libraries do, and sometimes claims its own stacks. The room makes room for a whisper of legend, to a tale that if a scribe nods off mid-copy, the unset words slide politely off the line and curl like cats beside the lamp. At dawn, they climb back onto the page, but leave ink paw prints as a gentle reminder. Charming, unverified, still. You notice a smudge that looks suspiciously paw-shaped and decide that evidence in Alexandria is often best enjoyed as poetry. You circle back through a portico, where a map lies open coastlines hatched in a careful brown hand, and for a breath, you're back at your chart table at sea, coaxing phantom islands to confess they were wishful thinking. The callback lands with a soft click, like a drawer closing without a sound. You touch the table with 2 fingers and stack tiny internal cards: jar, knot, bell, lamp, ripple, olive, sand, shelf, sleep. Cairo's desert is out there somewhere. There's pumice in another direction. But this room is the calm inside the hurricane of centuries. Historians still argue whether the Mausion functioned more like a university campus, with stipends and shared meals, or like a Temple College hybrid, with formal rites braided into study, whether membership depended on royal favor as much as on brilliance, whether the pinnaces survived in abridgments longer than anyone suspected before winking out. The specifics move around like sunlight across a floor. You let them travel, content to stand where they pass. The lamps arrive on a tray, small suns that smell of clean wool and crushed olives, and your chest loosens again, just as it did when the turtle at Yonaguni blinked you permission to stay calm. Joke 3 tilts its head at your mouth, and you let it out on a leash if you whisper shh in Greek. Does it sound exactly like shh? You test it, and the room obliges with the faintest smile. Even the fountain seems to lower its voice by half a drop. By a window, a clerk copies a decree onto stone, a bilingual stamp of certainty, explaining that Thonis and Heracleion are 2 names for 1 harbor gateway, and you feel the river wind, threads tugging you toward that drowned city you haven't reached yet. The way the oarlocks once tugged you toward Crete. The way cinnamon keeps sneaking into the chorus like a persistent alto. You tuck the tug away for later. For now, you're learning the library's heartbeat. You close your eyes to listen and catch the thread that has followed you from room to room. Oarlocks thocking, ash whispering, reeds chiming, parrotfish ticking. the chart table creaking everywhere a meter, everywhere the same, practiced by donkeys, fans, and tides. When you open your eyes, the cat is watching with that frank curiosity reserved for readers nearing a nap. You practice a small bow from the waist, the internationally recognized sign for "I will not touch the scrolls or the olives," and receive a second purse stamp of compliance. A bell from the harbor drifts in one precise note, and the shade on the floor deepens by the width of a thought. You thank the columns for their posture and step back out through the doorway. Where the street is warmer, the sun has decided to be generous, and a boy navigates through the glare with a stack of empty baskets and one very full cat. Both look at you as if you work here now. You accept your promotion to junior book and basket wrangler and walk into the brightness with the quiet confidence of someone who has learned, at last, how to keep promises without puncturing anything. The city hums around you, and somewhere a shutter clicks the way drawers close in rooms that remember how to take care of themselves. You wake to a taste like cool metal and meadow tea, and the dawn air presses along the beach with that polite, unhurried metronome you first learned from Athens donkeys and have been collecting ever since, now translated into wavelets that test your ankles as if trying on new shoes. You wade forward where the sea loosens into green glass, and the chill climbs slowly, silk over shins, ribboning your calves with fizz that feels suspiciously like your bedside lamp's ripple, deciding it wants a career on open water. Peat breath lifts from the low shore, sweet, damp, almost smoky, and a gull ticks attendance in a voice that still sounds like the surprised baby cry you heard back in the Aegean. In the shallows lie the bones of a forest, dark stumps smoothed to piano gloss, roots gripping sand as if still stubborn, rings reading time in drowned script. Your fingertips travel a groove as delicate as a cat's whisker. Yes, Alexandria's librarian is still pacing somewhere in your head, and the wood underwater feels cool as the knee of a granite god, only tender with grain instead of stone. Each step writes a new circle of ripples. Each circle widens, fades, and is replaced. A soft choreography of appearing and vanishing. The tide has practiced longer than charts have had corners. A cormorant rises beside you like a properly trained exclamation point, shakes diamonds from its sleeve, and rearranges itself into a solemn statue on a post. Your borrowed boots accept their role with a squelch that could be either complaint or applause. You decide it's applause because you are kind to footwear before breakfast. Joke one comes in on that wave your socks. Which applied for a desk job, submit a formal grievance about field assignments, and demand hazard pay in the form of dry sandwiches later. The sea, unfazed, continues to be the sea. The mainstream fact steps up with the poise of a staff curator dusting a favorite exhibit during the Mesolithic. The North Sea was not Holy Sea. A wide lowland later called Doggerland linked the chalk of Britain to the continent, a braided geography of marsh, lake, and dunes where people lived, walked, hunted, and cooked under skies you now wade beneath. For generations, fishers and trawlers have hauled up proof from the bottom antler picks, barbed harpoons, flaked flints that still fit a palm, bones of elk, aurochs, and the occasional mammoth. In recent decades, Seismic surveys mapping seabeds for industry traced ghost rivers and sandbars in astonishing detail. A drowned atlas pressed into a dark page. You crouch and lay your palm flat to a stump as smooth as shelled chocolate. And for a heartbeat, you hear with your fingertips a song almost like the faint hum that drifted from the flume paddles in the lab. Patient and even, sorting large and small, heavy and light, past and present. A breeze brings a thread of iodine and iron Nile tea reinterpreted by the North Sea, and the taste puts a tiny spark in your mouth the way contraband cinnamon did in Alexandria's cool halls. Somewhere down the beach, a dog contributes one brief editorial woof, then retires to peer review gull behavior. Between the little waves, the seafloor tells you a story in underlines here. A low rise that would have been dry path. There, a pale seam that once ran as a stream into a broader channel. A pattern of faint ridges that sketch old reed beds in the same tidy geometry you traced in Helix Marsh, where frogs learn to be metronomes and ground learn to forget. You hold still long enough to feel your own breath sink with the lifting and lowering of the sea's quiet chest. And for a moment, the water's cool reads like the lamp's ripple across your blanket, home's smallest tide rehearsed at continental scale. Historians still argue whether Doggerland drowned mostly in a slow, centuries-long rise of post-glacial seas, coastline stepping back like a polite librarian shelving books, or whether a single dramatic punctuation mark, the Storegga submarine landslide off Norway about 200 years ago, sent tsunamis that wrote a hard, fast line through communities already thinning, a big wave adding its exclamation to an ongoing paragraph. They also discuss whether the Dogger Bank persisted as islands with late hearths or yielded earlier to the advancing brine, and which channels stayed rivers longest before they married the tide. You let the arguments travel over you like cloud bands true weather. Informative. Not a storm you need to chase. A less attested tale pads along the coast and perches companionably on your shoulder on gale-torn nights at Dunwich in Suffolk. Some locals say the bells of the drowned medieval town ring under the surf, a bronze memory tolling through cliffs that cough sand. Charming. Unverified, you label it with a soft smile and file it beside cinnamon wind, underwater bells in far harbors, and the groupers moist behave. Still, the breeze hums across the hollow of your ear like a bottle's mouth, and you understand why bell stories cling to watery edges. Sound loves a place that edits it kindly. You take a few steps farther into the green-brown hush, and the meadow under the sea introduces itself by texture yielding, then springy, fine, then gummy. A polite surprise every meter, like conversation with someone who keeps swapping hats. A fragment of peat bumps your calf with the apologetic insistence of a cat, and you catch the faint sweetness that peat keeps folded inside like summer pressed between pages. The callback lands as if the lab door had opened your jar of not tea, the layers settling. Course to fine reminds you that water sorts stories too. Joke 2 floats up when a small wave slides obligingly into your boot and decides to stay. You name it your North Sea intern. Assign duties like ankle cooling and archival research, and promise an excellent letter of recommendation when it graduates back to the tide. The cormorant pretends not to hear this and continues its statue assignment like a dignified docent. Somewhere offshore, a seal shows a glossy head, the expression of a librarian who has seen everything and expects better whispering from you. You nod and try to splash more quietly. A trawler hums along the horizon bees at the waterline, and you picture a crewman setting a worked flint in a cup holder beside a thermos. The object passed later around a pub with the same tender care. An apprentice in the library gave a fresh reed pen. In a farmhouse miles inland, a mammoth tooth sits above a television like a fossilized cloud, and when the weather does its coastal theatrics, the whole shelf becomes a small museum of continuity kettle, photo, tooth, remote. You love how ordinary rooms shelter prehistory without making a fuss. You sit on a drowned log that barely clears the chop and watch the tide do its steady editing, writing a line of sand here, erasing there, crossing out a comma it has reconsidered. The mainstream fact taps your shoulder again, gentle but clear. The seismic maps showed paleo channels by the dozens, a braided delta that once spread like a quilt. Paleoecologists sift pollen and spores from cores to red birch and hazel moving in, pine retreating, marsh grass advancing, whole forests changing key, while the shoreline slid like a bench in a slow dance. You remember the eye of the Sahara's rings, the desert drawing circles where water used to be. Here the sea draws the negative of rivers, light over dark, absent land sketched by the curves of what replaced it. Joke 3 arrives with a gull that steals part of someone's sandwich and flies off at a speed that suggests professional development. You imagine a Mesolithic app store whose bestseller is Where Did I Leave My Camp Tide-Aware Edition, free download, optional whale song notifications, and an add-on for boot drying in difficult climates. The cormorant gives you a side-eye but declines to leave a review. You consider tying your bootlace with your signature ambitious knot and decide it's better as a land sport. You close your eyes for a few breaths and let the sound palette do the remembering small claps on wood, the silk hiss of rills, a faint diesel purr, a dog's friendly mutter, wind over ear bottle, your own tucked under it all. When you open them, a low swell has wandered in and given the drowned forest a polish. The stumps flash like wet piano keys, then settle back to their normal, dignified mat. The seam of darker water beyond you marks a deeper channel, and you imagine boats sliding there when this was all field and path. A long ribboned country that didn't know it would someday be map blue. You turn back toward the beach and the day warming on your shoulders. At the rack line, a feather is laid like a tidy signature, and you leave it where it belongs because some punctuation works better on the page. The intern exits your boot with a courteous slosh and a promise to write. You pour out what's left. Tie your lace with an ambitious flourish. Practice makes practiced, and here, very far off, one clean bell, as if the harbor at the end of your day wants to keep you on tempo. You let the note settle under your ribs and carry forward the lesson stamped into your souls. Some vanishings are not drama. They are patient edits written in water, best rid knee-deep, with good manners and a smile. By afternoon, the air warms from peat sweet to sugar salt, and the water under you turns from green tea to pane of glass turquoise that tilts sunlight into a soft quilt across the sand. The boat gives one friendly clonk, same family as the Aegean oarlocks and the harbor bell, and you lean over the gunwale as if peeking into a page the sea is happy to let you read. You slide in, and the ocean greets you with warm silk. Your breath through the snorkel settles to that old steady metronome, the Athens donkey's tempo now translated to bubbles that ladder up your cheek. Above, the hull rocks in tiny nods, approving your field trip. Below, the bottom shows a path of pale, flat slabs, edges squared by patient water, stepping away like tidy honeycombs that learned to stand in a line. You float along the first row and brush a fingertip over a corner, sun-warmed, rough as toast, pocked with tiny rooms where little clams practice being landlords and almost laugh at how familiar the texture feels after Yonaguni's cool bread crust stone and Bimini's warm cousin you only imagined back when you were still tracing maps on a blanket. A parrotfish sidles past, lacquered in teal and rose-red like a medieval margin come to life, and nips the limestone with clicks that sound exactly like polite carpentry tick. Tick, and you realize that if coral needs editors, these are the copy chiefs. Joke 1 arrives with the next breath your stomach, unhelpfully, decides the stone looks like a pastry. You remind it your snorkel is not a straw, and it sulks with dignity. Your steady fact lays itself down with the confidence of a compass rose off North Bimini in the Bahamas. Divers in the late 1960s began describing an underwater formation they nicknamed the Bimini Road, a swath of broad, flat beach rock slabs, many laid end-to-end for dozens of meters in 2 and sometimes 3 offset lines. Most geologists who've come here with clipboards and friendly skepticism read the pattern as naturally fractured and undercut beach rock carbonate sands cemented in place, then cracked along joints, pried by waves, planed by currents, and stacked by gravity into those deceivingly architectural rectangles. The sea, it turns out, enjoys right angles now and then. It's one of its party tricks. You follow the line as it doglegs under a tongue of sand and reappears, then doubles, then thins. Like a sentence that enjoys commas. A nurse shark naps under a shelf, hugged to the bottom with the serene focus of Alexandria's cat during a lampside yawn. You adjust your finning to polite whisper speed and let the shark keep its seminar on stillness. Overhead, ripples paint slow stripes across the slabs. The bedside lamps ripple scaled up to cathedral size, and you remember how many rooms have practiced this trick. The marsh gates shimmer, the lab flume's glossy belt, even the cinnamon rumor that keeps stowing away in your pocket of scents. Historians still argue whether any of these blocks carry the touch of hands straightened, stacked, reworked into a slipway or harbor wall when sea level stood lower, or whether every crisp edge, stepped terrace, and neat seam is wholly the ocean's geometry, a collage in limestone laid by currents and time. They point to bedding planes and joint patterns, to edges that march like old shorelines, to doubled rows that look suspiciously organized. Others point back to the habit of the eye to assemble order from accident, reminding you how often you've seen patterns bloom from wind, water, and coincidence. The debate here moves like light in shallow waves, forward, back, agreeable and steady, A less attested current sidles in wearing a vintage date stamp. The American trance reader Edgar Cayce famously predicted Atlantis would rise near Bimini around 1968-69, and believers later smiled at the timing of divers first mapping this formation. Locals add smaller wonders, stories of slow, pale orbs wafting like Bimini fireflies on night dives, or compasses that twitch on opinionated tides. Charming, unverified. You label them, and keep them anyway in your maybe cabinet beside cinnamon wind, underwater bells in far harbors, and the grouper who stamped your imaginary visitor log with "Don't touch the granite." You hover over a joint where two giant tiles meet, seem so clean that your mind does a double take and tries the word road on for size. Your fingers find only C, no mortar, no tool mark, just pockets of sand and small shells studying punctuation. A school of silversides performs a shimmering clause change around your mask and then vanishes into the grammar of light. Your mask strap, tied with your signature ambitious knot back on the boat, stays perfectly behaved. That's joke 2. A silent promotion to certified reef-appropriate knot, which the ocean acknowledges by not testing it today. The slabs step down once, twice, as though following an old beach line. You drift along the fall like a page margin and listen to the clicks, the soft hiss of your exhale, the distant clonk of the boat. That whole choir of beats you've been collecting since Athens. A ray lifts like a rug being shaken carefully, politely sand glittering in a slow fall behind it, and settles again where the road thins to suggestion. You think of Doggerland's drowned paths, of Helic's reed-braided choir, of Pavlopetri's lanes the sea chose to keep as lines and corners. Your head becomes a small atlas of vanishing styles, and your shoulders answer by lowering another millimeter you didn't know you still held from the morning's chill. You roll to float on your back and let the soundscape soften. The boat writes shadow over you that looks, from here, like another platform you could climb if light were sturdy. Clouds drift like sleeves being rolled down. The same cinnamon thread sneaks into the air, the stowaway spice from a crew bag, and braids with salt until you can almost taste Azores basalt in memory. Whales drawing notes down columns of lava. The callback pleases you. The world loves a motif, and you are finally learning to enjoy being the quiet audience for it. Face down again. You trail the line to where two big stones sit like stacked loaves. The lower one is scalloped. Pastry again. Your stomach perks up. Your brain sends it a memo about professionalism. A wrasse inspects your glove with bureaucratic interest. And joke 3 lands neatly. If reef fish had HR, parrotfish would file for carpentry hazard pay and receive instead a politely worded email plus a commemorative t-shirt. The wrasse, being a professional, refuses to laugh but does grant you a brief performance review in the form of a head tilt, adequate buoyancy. Good fin etiquette. Snack focus needs improvement. The mainstream fact returns for one more. Bow surveys have measured block lengths and orientations, mapped the 2 and 3 row segments, and found that the formation often parallels the present shoreline, consistent with natural beach rock development along an ancient beach face. Other nearby slabs and pavements show similar fracture patterns without any whisper of myth. It isn't that mystery dies under measurement. It just changes temperature, cooling into something the hand can learn, the way papyrus felt under your nails, or the eye of the Sahara warmed your pocket as a memory more than a riddle. You turn toward the boat, and the path fades to glimmers under thin sand, then to a field of ripples that look like satin laid carefully and pressed with thumb lines. The nurse shark hasn't moved. The parrotfish keep their union meeting at the edge of the block. Your bubbles put small bells on the underside of the surface. You pause and look back once, not to own anything, just to promise to keep reading kindly, where the sea leaves chalk marks for the idea of a road. At the latter, you let the water drain from your sleeves in silver strings and climb into air that smells like warm salt and sunscreen, that same domestic perfume that somehow closes the distance between laboratory fans, marsh reeds, library ink, and boat diesel. The towel remembers your shape. The sun resumes the job it had already started. Someone hands you a slice of something sweet and yellow. You remember to breathe before you bite, and the world rewards you with a taste that feels exactly like warm light would taste if it developed culinary ambitions. On deck, your ambitious knot holds your mask to the rail, as if proud to be useful twice in one day. You glance down and see only your reflection sky broken into squares by the boat's wake. No slabs, no seams, no debate, just blank water with excellent manners. That feels right. Some places want to be understood at the speed of a fin kick and then be forgotten by the surface until the next gentle visit. You listen for a bell, maybe the harbor, maybe imagined, and hear only the old metronome of your breath syncing with the tiny lift of the hull, which might be the kindest answer of all, a beat to carry forward. Something steady, something small, a tide you can pack. You wake into dry brightness the color of toast, and the air tastes like iron warmed in an oven. A low wind combs your sleeves with powder-fine grit, while the ground under your sandals turns from pebble to plate. Ribbed rock laid in neat, shallow waves as if the sea had dropped off a stone memory and promised to return for it later. You crest a small ridge and stop because the world opens in circles, one pale ring nested inside a russet ring, nested again. Concentric ripples pressed into the desert so wide, your eyes have to teach your breath a slower pace. Heat leaks up through your soles like banked coals. The light is a clean brass hush. The silence adds a soft footnote of shh that sounds suspiciously like the library aisles in Alexandria, asking you to keep your jokes on simmer. You roll the chalky oval you pocketed from an old desert afternoon, the eye's cousin between finger and thumb, then tuck it away. Today, you meet the larger family, the Richat structure, often nicknamed the Eye of the Sahara, a near-perfect circle about 40-plus kilometers across in Mauritania, a geologic dome whose layered rocks bulged upward and then weathered back into rings as softer beds wore down and harder beds stood proud. That's your steady fact, the kind that sits confidently in a geology textbook and still manages a wink first suspected as a meteor crater, later demoted from drama when the rock showed no shock features, no glassy shatter, no shocked quartz, only the dignified laminations of sandstone, limestone, and quartzite, telling a slower story of uplift and erosion. Astronauts love it. They use it to find themselves from orbit the way sailors use a lighthouse. You walk the arc of one ridge and let the wind file your thoughts smooth. The rock underfoot is varnished by time, a thin, dark polish that catches sun in bronze whispers. The desert's version of your lamp's tiny gilded flourishes. Far off, a pickup dots the plain like a beetle. Nearer, a beetle impersonates a pickup with admirable commitment. Both keep their lanes. Joke 1 arrives as you invent a desert app called Find My Ring Geology Edition, which would ping you whenever you accidentally wander out of concentric alignment. The wind, a seasoned critic, offers a dry shh and declines to download. You lean a palm to a pale ledge and feel last noon's heat sleep there still. Like the way the pier boards breathed back warmth in the night-stored sun. Released slowly. The planet's favorite trick for comforting hands. The rings step up and down around you, a bowl inside a bowl, and for a moment you see a city that never was terraces. Streets. A central circle where a fountain might have stood if water loved this neighborhood. Your mind tries architecture on the geology the way you tried the word road on Bimini's rectangles. Historians still argue whether spectacles like this, inland and austere, had anything at all to do with the Atlantis story, whether later readers with a taste for coordinates retrofitted these rings into their maps of lost cities, or whether the resemblance is just that human habit of finding faces in clouds and harbors in stone, compelling and coincidental. A less attested murmur sits down beside you, wearing a caravan scarf. Some guides say a compass jitters near certain arcs on breathless evenings, as if the eye prefers you to find your way by sky. Others swear the rings hum at night when the wind slips perfectly across them. A note you don't hear so much as keep in your ribs, cousin to those drowned plaza bells you keep meeting, from Helix to Heracleion. Charming, unverified. You label the stories, and still you notice how the breeze adjusts, whistling once through a notch like a reed pen testing a nib, then falling back to the respectful library. Shh. You crunch up to a higher, tougher band quartzite that keeps its shoulders, and the landscape rearranges under your angle, each circle sliding into the next like nested bowls in a careful kitchen. The light here is granular, the color palette pure medieval indigo shadow tucked below saffron ledges, russet patches where iron kisses stone, leaf green illusions wherever mirage makes a short-lived pond out of the horizon. You grin at the palette and think of your illuminated margins, of crowns and cuffs and little gilded leaves, and you realize the desert, in its own flat perspective, paints miniatures at continental scale. Your second gentle joke taps you on the shoulder as a tuft of straw tries to steal your shoelace. You award yourself an honorary degree in field knot theory for rescuing the ambitious knot without kneeling on sizzling rock. And imagine the grouper from Heracleion stamping your certificate with approved "Do not touch the granite" or the quartzite. The breeze, remembering its cat-like scholar roll from Alexandria, curls around your ankles and pretends this is peer review. You pause in a narrow notch where rings tighten into a stone hallway, and the air smells faintly of flint and warm pennies. When you close your eyes, you hear a faint, familiar inventory donkey metronomes translating to oarlocks, then to boat clonk, then to snorkel. Now the wind picks up the beat. Steady, old, patient. You open your eyes and follow a bright vein across a ledge, a thin line like a reed pen drawn with too little ink, and it takes you around a bend to a pale inner band where the desert feels briefly cooler, as if the bowl held shade the way a map holds a possibility. Historians still argue whether Bronze Age travelers could plausibly have crossed this plateau in numbers that would seed a story outward trans-Saharan routes threading oases. Whispers of stone rings carried coastward with salt and dates, or whether such speculation ignores the hard arithmetic of water, distance, and time. They argue, too, about when this structure became a named landmark in the written record, and how much of its fame belongs to the age of flight and space. You don't adjudicate. You practice the same soft posture you learned at the marsh gate near hillock knees bent, breath easy, conclusions placed gently on a ledge to air, not to harden. A line of tiny wind-scripted ripples crosses a patch of sand at your feet, miniature dunes with the same tidy march you watched in the lab flume, and you crouch, delighted at how the planet keeps repeating itself in different registers, wavelets on a pier, ripples on Bimini stone, rings in desert bedrock, crescents on a handspan of sand. You draw one small curve with a fingertip, and the wind erases it in 2 heartbeats. Lesson delivered with excellent manners. If maps had office hours, you think, this is where they'd quietly apologize for their mistakes. High Brazil and Frylin bowing out, Sandy Island slipping off stage, and the eye, patient, nodding that circles are not harbors and harbors are not circles, and all of them still worth a careful look. To the east, the outer ring fades into a broad plain speckled with pebbles like pepper, and a hawk writes a crisp line across the sky that ends in a dot you can hear more than see. You sip from your canteen and the water tastes like warm coin and clean dust, a cousin to the Nile's brackish tea without the river's gossip. You let the swallow sit on your tongue and remember other registers, the cinnamon rumor threading Santorini, the basil-scented harbor in Alexandria, the peat-sweet dawn over Doggerland, the iron tang that rode your regulator hose in Heracleion, the whales braiding bus through basalt courtyards in the Azores. The callback rope stretches happily. You have been making it on purpose. You step down onto a smoother bench and find 4 stones arranged in a small circle, blackened by old flame. A palm-sized hearth with nothing left to burn but memory. The archive here is spare and pointed, a knot of fiber snagged on a thorn, a boot print turned to suggestion, a char smudge like a fingerprint. Your third soft joke sidles in. You imagine a desert pop-up cafe called Circles, featuring nothing round but the horizon and flatbread. And your only menu item is tea of respect, brewed slowly enough to teach patience. Your beetle customer, punctual, pays with the coin of dignity, and leaves unsatisfied, but wiser. A dust devil writes a quick cursive across the inner floor, 1 sentence, lively and illegible, and then the air lays down its pen. You stand and feel the rings slide again, their edges aligning and misaligning as you walk, like a strobe for ground rather than light. For a half-second, your ears conjure that single bell you carry from harbors and drowned squares. Here, the sound is drier. A tiny click at the edge of hearing, like a grain settling in a crack. Charming, unverified. You let the maybe sit with the others in the pocket cabinet that has grown spacious with use. The steady fact taps once more. Tidally rock units exposed here range across ages-old cores ringed by younger sediments, so the circles are not one moment frozen, but a cross-section of many, lifted into a dome and carved back down by wind and water in a kind of patient, circular essay on geology. No crates of orichalcum, no ringed cays, no drowned bull courtyards. And yet your mind refuses to ban wonder. It simply adjusts its target, finding beauty in the clean logic of layers and the way sunlight behaves when it lands on quartzite that has been reading the sky for 1,000,000 afternoons. You turn outward along the last pale band until the rings compress into a single curve, and then into suggestion. The same fade you loved when Bimini stones surrendered to sand, and when Yonaguni steps blurred into ordinary seafloor. The drawer closes softly. The wind takes your fingerprints off the last ledge faster than you can make them. You answer with a librarian's shh for no one in particular, and even the beetle pauses, which you take as a positive review. At your small camp, a kettle mutters itself toward tea, the steam smelling faintly of mint and dust, the desert's version of cinnamon and olive in old rooms, and a square of shade remembers how to be cool. You sit cross-legged, let your shoulders drop another measured grain, and sip until heat and thirst agree to split the bill. Somewhere above, a contrail sketches a ruler straight line across the bowl, and you picture an astronaut glancing down, finding the eye, and whispering. There, while you look up and whisper, here, and both of you mean the same quiet thing, orientation, without ownership. When the cup is empty, you tip it to watch its small, perfect circle of shine tighten, loosen, and tighten again, your old metronome rehearsing in porcelain, and you breathe in time, slow and sure. The day leans toward saffron. The rings behind you keep blinking their patient noon, and you, a careful reader of patterns with an upgraded knot and a growing fondness for not solving things, fold the image into the atlas you're carrying, right between the honeycombed road and the terraces under glass green swell. Another place that teaches you how to stand still kindly and let stories stop needing an ending. You step from the bright rings of desert into a cabin of dusk and wood, where tar and salt make a quiet cologne, and a lamp performs its old ripple across a creaking chart table, turning compass roses into coin-sized pools of light. The boards beneath your feet keep a patient metronome, like the donkeys in Athens teaching the whole how to breathe. You set the chalky oval you borrowed from the eye of the Sahara on a curling corner, a desert circle keeping a sea sheet flat, and the paper exhales the clean, linen smell of maps that have recently considered the wind. Outside, a harbor bell gives one true note, the punctuation you've been carrying. Inside, a brass compass quivers on the margin as if it would like to be reassured about north. For joke 1, you tap the lid and ask if it needs coffee. The needle declines by trembling politely in place. Lines spill from the compass, rose like spokes spun from silk rhums that fan and cross until the Mediterranean looks stitched into obedience. And along those clean coasts, your steady fact arrives with confident ink. Medieval and early modern pilots worked from portolan charts dense with toponyms and wind lines. Later, in 1569, Gerardus Mercator stretches the globe into his famous projection so that straight lines plot constant compass courses. A gift to navigators even if Greenland ends up looking like it has been lifting weights. The lamp's gleam runs along a rhumb and pauses at the Western Ocean, where a tiny round island lounges without apology. Hy Brazil, sometimes bisected by a neat strait, sometimes just a button of land west of Ireland. Your fingertip rests on the circle. The parchment warms there. Your pulse does that double step you felt over Bimini's rectangles, and the eyes rings. The mind's quiet thrill when a shape suggests a story. The ship lists, writes, sighs. The chart murmurs. A gull drops a brief complaint outside the same surprised baby cry you first heard among the Cyclades, and then even the gull decides to study. Historians still argue whether Hy Brazil rose from rare sightings of the porcupine bank, lifted into view by mirage and low cloud, or whether it belongs to a purely literary tradition that maps took on faith story first. Geology optional. Some add a third tug, proposing that fishermen's waypoints and wishful currents hardened into a dot that charts found hard to quit. You don't referee. You let the debate move like surf around pilings push, pull, while you practice the now familiar art of promising rather than puncturing. You rotate the folio, and another island sprawls into view like a cat on a warm Atlas Friesland, the couch day of phantom lands, living most famously on the Zeno map of 1558, and a few of its cartographic children before it fades like a dream the afternoon forgets. The coastlines are too busy for the North Atlantic, you know. Islets scatter like crumbs. A neat ring of harbors offers hospitality that historians suspect never existed. You grin because patterns are lullabies, first circles in sand, then rectangles underwater. Now rectangles of coastline invented with the same tidy confidence. When maps have insomnia, they doodle. Joke 2 arrives as you lash the far edge of the chart to a belaying pin with your ambitious knot. Recently promoted to cartographic duty, the rope accepts the honor without drama, which is what you want in both knots and atlases. Along the lower margin, a tiny sea lion grins beside a northerly shore, proof that even sober charts enjoy a wink. Here be dragons almost never appears in period Latin or vernacular, your steady fact whispers. But monsters and marginal creatures cavort anyway, as if the ocean had commissioned its own illuminated margins. You taste a fleck of grit on your lip and think of the eye's toasted light. You smell cinnamon, impossible and familiar, as if a pocket tin from Santorini has found its way into the galley, your traveling rumor refusing to clock out. The lamp ripples again, and the rose seems to breathe. For a private moment, you hear the portolan hum in the same key as your snorkels hush and the oarlocks thock, a little chorus of navigation singing you forward. You turn a page and the paper ages beneath your fingers whiter, crisper. The lines spare, and a rectangle in the Pacific holds its chin up. Sandy Island, decisively inked on 20th century charts. Your steady fact taps with modern knuckles. Surveyors in our lifetime steamed those coordinates, and found only open blue. The island was an inherited error, compounded by data sets and traditions, erased after a polite but firm conversation with reality. You enjoyed the theater of it, the way a wrong thing can be escorted gently off stage, much as High Brazil and Fryland bowed when the ocean took attendance, an artful edit rather than a scolding. The lamp warms your hands. The ship gives the soft clonk you've come to recognize as approval. Somewhere in that comfortable rhythm, a less attested anecdote tiptoes in wearing paper shoes. Cartographers have been known to hide copyright trap streets and phantom hamlets to catch plagiarists. And one such invented place, a glow, in upstate New York, accidentally became real when a shop adopted the name. A map's fiction manifested a signpost. The way a lullaby sometimes slows a heart. Charming, semi-verified. You shelve it in the maybe cabinet beside Cinnamon Wind and Drowned Plaza Bells. Either way, it pairs well with the lamp's ripple, which loves a motif. You lean closer and follow a ragged coastline where notes crowd the margin reports of mirage fata morgana bending ships into floating cities and slicing islands into twins. A hand has added, in tiny script, beware of optical weather, which you adopt as life advice. Your breath slows to the chart's pace. You hear, under the wood and ink quiet, that old desert hush. The cabin smells faintly of rope and warmed parchment. The compass needle, undecided between north and the romance of west, makes its very small, brave decisions. Joke three lands as you whisper, recalculating to a globe that doesn't have a satellite to kiss. The compass, at last dignified, settles half a hair closer to true. You set High Brazil beside familiar ghosts, Antilia, the Isle of Seven Cities, once plotted with confidence in the Western Ocean, Brazil Islands that wandered, Busa Island that navigators chased and failed to meet. The Atlas feels like a family album of optimistic cousins, all of them smiling too broadly. None of them harmful once you learn how to say goodbye nicely. You think of your jar from the lab, not tea where coarse grains settle first and fines last. Maps behave the same, big mistakes fall out quickly. The delicate, beloved ones take longer to drift down and join the shelf. A breeze slants through the hatch and the flame leans, sending your lamp's tide across the compass and the rose. You ride that tiny wave back through your own nights, Plato's table, wax sweet, Bimini honey warm, Helic marsh cool, Azores fog soft on lashes, desert rings blink bright, and you notice how each place, even the invented ones, has taught the same small skill, how to relax your shoulders, how to breathe in time, how to let an outline be an outline without rushing to fill it. The chart squeaks minutely under your wrist, the way papyrus edges flaked like sea salt in Alexandria. The callback lands like a cat stepping onto your lap there. You are in the right room. You slide a finger eastward to a stitched name, Piri Reis. 1513. A world in brown and blue fragments assembled from earlier pilots and rumors. The Antarctic-looking hem has tempted imaginations for a century. You note the tidy fact that his coastlines likely borrowed Portuguese and Colombian sources. You let the dreamier arguments drift by like clouds. This is not a verdict room. This is a listening room. The bell on deck taps once, consenting. The compass wraps its tin lid as the ship noses a little swell. You wait another corner of the chart with the desert stone, that chalky circle traveling happily from dune to desk to deck. You feel its remembered noon in your palm and the wood's remembered salt in your knuckles. The world, you decide, is excellent at passing notes in class, whale song through lava courtyards, bells through fog, silt through fingers, lamp through glass. Now circles talking to rums, so you can hear both agree that wonder and correction are not enemies. You fold the sheet along an old, kind crease, no hard edges. Your scribes whisper and slide it into its sleeve. The rope you tied sits, unambitious and perfect. Outside the harbor breathes and rewrites itself in clean ellipses. You blow the lamp low and let the star-flecked dark redraw the room in softer lines. The compass brightens in its own tiny way, as if pleased to be off-duty. You step out to the rail and find the air carrying a taste of iron and clove, Nile tea diluted by ocean with a pinch of your pet rumor, while the bell, impeccable as ever, refuses to ring unless the wind truly means it. Back at the table, you rest your palm where high Brazil once sat and feel only wood, which is the point. Vanishing, when done kindly, leaves the grain smoother and the lesson steadier. You thank the map silently, so as not to wake the sea monsters, then smile at the little sea lion in the margin and forgive it for stealing what looks suspiciously like a sandwich. The ship settles an inch deeper into quiet. Somewhere in the ink-black beyond, someone is practicing the ancient art of getting from A to B by keeping their pulse kind. The chart hopes to help. The sky already does. And you are exactly where the lines cross. Listening as paper learns to breathe like water. By dawn, the rums you traced last night have turned into skylines and swell lines, and you follow them to the far side of maps, where the western Pacific folds itself into green-blue steps. The boat rocks in a respectful metronome. The same breath you learned from donkeys in Athens and oarlocks in the Cyclades. And when you slip off the stern, the water receives you like cool glass. Light chops itself into silver ladders on your shoulders. A rope runs down into clarity with the calm authority of a sentence diagram. Your ambitious knot holds to the cleat and salutes you with quiet competence. Below, ledges descend like terraces for an underwater audience that never grows impatient. Each edge feels plainer smooth and bread crust crisp beneath your palm, and your bubbles wander up the stone in little bells, a private carillon that refuses to wake the sea. You fine along the first shelf and then the next as the swell ushers you forward. Back, forward, back. A patient usher with excellent aisle training. This is where your steady fact surfaces with the clean outline of a basalt cone against morning off Yonaguni, the westernmost of Japan's Yaeyama Islands. Divers began reporting in 1986 thanks to local guide Kihachiro Aratake. Great step-like formations of sandstone and mudstone, now nicknamed the Monument. Most geologists explain the crisp geometry by natural jointing and bedding planes planed by wave action and currents. Their edges sharpened where tough layers stand proud as the softer weather out. You test that story with your fingers, reading the stone the way you once read papyrus grain in Alexandria. Your fingertips find no mortar, no tool chatter, only pores and tiny worm-bored pinholes. A masonry of time. The wall on your right drops into a long, straight chute. You hover over it and feel the surge pull you like a bead on a string. Polite as a librarian guiding you between stacks, a butterfly fish materializes in the notch and stares with the bland confidence of someone who has mastered shushing. For joke 1, you present your slate as a library card and promise to return all borrowed edges on time. The fish approves by doing nothing at all, which is the highest praise in certain reading rooms. Downslope, a bigger platform opens like a low stage broad, right-angled, scalloped with light, and your brain does the same pleasant double-take it did over the eye of the Sahara circles turned to architecture there. Here, rectangles layer as if the sea were building with pages. The swell pushes a breath. You drift along the 90-degree lip. Your lamp beam because yes. The old ripple follows you even here, skips across a corner, and gives it a tiny halo, the way moonlight did to compass roses. Historians still argue whether any of this geometry bears the touch of tools, blocks trimmed, faces leveled, causeways aligned when sea level was lower, or whether the whole spectacle is just nature's gift for looking designed when fractures meet persistence. The debate, like this surge, slips forward and back without ever needing to shout. On one terrace, a squat rectangle squats a bit prouder than its neighbors, nicknamed by guides with endearing local confidence. Today, it reminds you not of a turtle, but of a folded futon the sea forgot to put away. A pair of batfish hover beside it like footnotes, tidy and slow. For joke 2, you thank Yonaguni for opening a free stair class, Stairmaster Ancient Edition, and confess you will still choose the gentle ramp because you're here for story, not quads, the batfish. Being punctuation, respond by maintaining perfect commas. Your regulator keeps its hush. And you feel how the metronome from last night's chart table has learned to breathe underwater. A narrow trench, shoulder wide, straight as a sentence, invites you onward. You tuck your arms and let the water slide you through, a bead reading a line. Grooves on the wall are shallow and regular. Are they ripple marks frozen in stone, or only your lighting making music with edges? You resist the referee's whistle. The light dims for a cloud heartbeat and returns richer. You remember your not tea jar and how fine settled last. The sea does its sorting here. 2 sand sighing off steps, coarser grains clinging like stubborn footnotes. From the shadow beyond the trench, a race the size of a paperback tips in, eyeing your glove. You can almost hear it drafting a report for the Department of Edge's tick, tick, as if parrotfish carpenters from Bimini had franchised an office in the Western Pacific. You ease onto another platform to rest your palm flat. Warmth lingers, a memory from the sun that made it this far thinner than the honey heat of Bimini stone, but still a surprise you feel in your wrist bones. Around the corner, the ledges rearrange, stage to staircase to balcony. The ocean is an excellent set designer. A less attested local tale swims past in a ripple of folklore. Some divers say that on the stillest evenings, a faint flute seems to thread the rock. A dragon from Ryukyu stories practicing scales in a neighboring chamber. Charming, unverified. You file it beside Cinnamon Wind, Tartessos bells, and paper towns that became real. And for half a breath, you taste wood smoke that obviously isn't there. Your mouth smiles around the regulator the way it did when the grouper in Heracleion stamped your imaginary visitor log. The current freshens a mood people here call the washing machine, and you feel your body practice the posture you learned in the Helic Marsh and the North Sea meadow underwater. Soften, align, let the force pass through rather than resist. You give the rock a courteous two-finger touch and exhale to sink, practicing the same kindness you used on papyrus, and maps don't puncture, only promise. The rope above hums in a note that remembers harbor bells. A minute later, it quiets, as if grading your form and granting a pass. Edge by edge, you learn the grammar bedding planes step down. Joints intersect, corners weather square, because their parent rock prefers that chemistry, and surge carves precisely because it has all the time in the world. Your steady fact stands by. Patient, the formation is part of the Yaeyama group, late Miocene to Pliocene sediments, uplifted and planed. Most researchers who've mapped it in detail point to those joint sets and wave platforms to explain why this looks so expertly arranged. Historians still argue whether small-scale alignments, a pillar here, a channel there, could ever be human tweaking, or whether our eyes simply can't resist a right angle in a wild place. The conversation, like your bubbles, rises and breaks sweetly without a verdict. A shadow shifts in a shallow pool where coral heads sit like sleepy hedgehogs. Inside, a hawksbill turtle dozes with a flipper draped across its beak, a scholar napping in the stacks. You do not intrude. For joke 3, you promise to enroll in the Turtles Masterclass on restorative naps. Prerequisites mercifully waived. The turtle blinks once, which you choose to read as departmental approval. Somewhere beyond, a barracuda holds so still it could be a carved lintel. You browse elsewhere out of respect for both lintels and barracuda. You angle up and find a ramp that seems to run forever, too straight for comfort, too smooth for coincidence. Then remind yourself that comfort and coincidence are not trustworthy dive buddies. Your brain loves pattern, the sea loves repetition, and between them they can stage a convincing civic square. You taste iodine and a whisper of iron, the same flavors that rode the Nile's tea in Aboukir Bay. Your body logs another callback, and your shoulders let go of a thread you didn't know you were holding since the chart table. The lamp ripple returns across your mask frame. Yes, that old friend. And when the light skims a bevel, the bevel throws back a thin gilded line like shell gold on vellum. A tiny illuminated initial in a book written by waves. At the trench's end, the steps soften into suggestion. Sand twitches sideways along a face and spills into a neat fan. The sea edits as it composes. Ahead, turtles' tracks cross the seafloor like signatures. Behind, your fin prints blur as fast as you make them. You think of high Brazil bowing off stage, of the eye simplifying into plain, of the Bimini Road tapering to glitter, of the canal in Heracleion that still knew which way was forward. The drawer, once again, closes softly. You approve the craftsmanship. You take the ascent line and stop at your safety pause, neutrally buoyant between ledge and light. For a moment, the world hangs and everything in it remembers to be kind. Far above, the boat gives that family clonk, a cousin to the Aegean tap and the harbor punctuation. Far below, the terraces keep their conversation in a language of joints and surge. You're learning to respect without translation. You check your knot at your console, a habit now more ritual than need, and it sits exactly as a bedtime story prefers: quiet, simple, enough. Breaking the surface is like waking into a cleaner version of the same dream, the sky wide, the boat's rail familiar under your palm, the breeze carrying a trace of cinnamon from some galley pocket that refuses to be scientifically explained. You peel your mask. The metronome moves from bubbles to hull ticks. The world smells like warm salt, neoprene, and a hint of rope. On deck, a coil waits for work. You tie your signature loop without looking, because sleep skills can be daytime skills too. And the skipper gives a single nod that lands like a stamp. Looking back, the water is blank as good manners, revealing nothing of the rectangles and stages that filled your eyes. That's fine vanishing. Done well. Leaves behind steadiness, not proofs. You sip from a cup that tastes faintly like the Nile's old pennies turned to tea, and the vineyard stones of Pico turn to warmth. The boat noses home, and under the keel, Yonaguni's ledges keep taking apart and putting back together the same lucid geometry. Gentle as breath, stubborn as time, unbothered by whether you call them temple or terrace, monument or textbook, so long as you listen in the right key. Green-brown light folds around you like gauze as you ease down the shot line, and the bay's silt rises to greet your wrists in warm curls before remembering to be cool again. Your breath takes up that familiar metronome, the one you learned from donkeys, oarlocks, and hulls, until even your bubbles seem to nod. Yes, yes, quietly. The water tastes faintly of iron and tea leaves. Somewhere above, the lift barge answers with one soft clonk from its rigging, a cousin to the Bimini tap and the harbor bell that has followed you like punctuation. Shadow Gains features first a hip-high plinth, then a knee, then a placid granite thigh. You lay 2 fingers on stone the way you touched papyrus in Athens. Don't puncture, only promise and feel a cold that seems not unfriendly, only old. A carved falcon peers from weed and oyster, lidless and patient. Lotus petals catch puddles of light that look like tiny saucers of gold leaf laid by a careful hand. Your lamp performs its favorite ripple, of course it does, and the wobble gilds an eyelid, then drifts on, practicing the same small tide it made across your blanket on night 1. This is where your steady fact wades in. Dignified as a priest on a quay off the Nile Delta in Aboukir Bay, the team led by Frank Gaudio and the IEASM mapped and excavated a drowned harbor city known to Egyptians as Thonis and Greeks as Heracleion at the turn of the 21st century, using side-scan sonar, magnetometry, and patient dives to reveal temples, quays, channels, shipwrecks, anchors, and stelae that stitched 2 names into one place. You mouth the paired titles into your regulator as if the stone could hear you. The bay approves with a ribbon of clearer water that moves past like a sleeve. A diver's slate flicks. You fine over to a granite colossus rising from a sling, river-shouldered and smiling in that ancient way that looks like patience masquerading as joy. The straps creak softly, a language of threads. Silt lifts and settles like snow learned from the Nile. You wait, and the face reappears as if waking from a long nap. For joke 1, you imagine the underwater visitor log being stamped by a very stern grouper, "Behave. Do not touch the granite," and when an enormous grouper does, in fact, tilt by, lips pursed like a librarian, you salute with your light and promise eternal good manners. You coast along a block whose corners have softened into music. Once, it was crisp as a scribe's square, but time has sanded it to a lullaby. A shallow groove in the silt shows where a canal ran. Your guide's hand traces the line in the water, and the current seems to nod. Remembering, you picture a procession barged inland lamps practicing ripples on every prow between keys stacked with jars and scales. An entire city breathing with the tide. Historians still argue whether the final drowning came as one or two sharp disasters, earthquake and liquefaction in a brutal night, or as a longer subsidence complicated by sea level rise and Nile mouth wanderings. They also keep debating the city's exact role compared with Naucratis and later Alexandria religious gateway first, customs house first, or simply both braided together like reeds. The silt edits everyone's tone to soft. The arguments move like tide push. Pull without malice. A column drum lies half buried, its flutes collecting threads of shell. You run water across them with your hand and listen to the ridges whisper. Beside it, a slab wears bilingual marks. You cannot read here, though you know what they say, because you met their kin on dry pages, decrees that named Thonis and Heracleion together, proof engraved in stone as if to help future divers who prefer their facts anchored. Your chest loosens the way it did when the turtle at Yonaguni blinked an all clear. The drawer of the story opens just far enough to air the linen and slides shut again without a click. Brackish taste grows stronger. A swirl brings the Nile's cool mouth to your lips and leaves. You think of Helix mud forgetting how to hold itself, of Doggerland meadow sweet rising from peat, of Bimini's honeycombed warmth, and feel how all those lessons have been rehearsals for this rivers and seas, writing together, erasing together, filing whole neighborhoods under silt. See also patience on the sand. Anchors sleep by the 100 stones and lead their holes emptied of rope, but not of purpose. For joke 2, you picture an ancient harbor master stamping cargo papers with a cat's paw, approved because Alexandria's supervising mouser still wanders your imagination. Right on cue, a tiny crab conducts a brisk inspection of your glove, finds your paperwork in order, and scuttles away with minutes. Here is your second steady fact. Unshowy and solid surveys in this bay have documented dozens of shipwrecks, rivercraft, and seacraft mingled, and hundreds of anchors and measuring weights. A dense archive of movement that says arrivals and departures happen here for centuries. A Naos small shrine sits square and perfect. Doorway framed by silt like a picture in a muted gilded frame. You shine your beam inside and then stop. The way you stopped at the marsh gate in Halik, not a place to crowd. The water inside is still enough to see yourself as a dark, wobbly hieroglyph that means person practicing restraint. A less attested story drifts by on the faintest chill of current. Some local fishers say that in clean-edged winter air, you can hear a single bell from under Aboukir Bay, as if a long-anchored chain tried one note and decided it was enough. Charming. Unverified. You label it and notice how your lift barge chooses that moment to give one small metal syllable, as if folklore had found a Foley artist. You file the bell beside Cinnamon Wind from Santorini, chiming reeds at Halik, and the paper town that once became real on a map. The cabinet of maybe grows roomier and somehow more comforting. You drift past a rubble of blackened brick where fire met water long ago and lost the argument gently. The edges are rounded as if sleep had time to do its work. Another diver raises 2 fingers and draws a rectangle in the water stele, and you both drop to read what the light will give. It is enough just to see the borderlines and think of the scribe carving in certainty, never guessing a snorkeled audience would someday read the edges with C in their mouths. For joke 3, you imagine a bureaucratic address change notice chiseled at the bottom. Please forward mail to Silt, and you smuggle your own grin into the regulator without leaking. Your fin tips brush a neat row of small plinths, each with a dim recess that once held something sacred or practical. The placements align in a way that tempts you to see sightlines from key to temple, from threshold to shrine. Historians still argue whether such alignments are deliberate sacred routes or simply the survivorship bias of robust stones hanging on while softer structures walked away in the long dissolve. You do not adjudicate, because the tide is already doing that job with infinite patience. The lesson keeps repeating itself in different dialects, right angles at Yonaguni, circles in the Sahara, rectangles at Bimini, grooves here in green water, each a study in how easy it is for your pattern-hungry mind to lean, and how pleasant it can be to lean without falling. Upline. A lift bag fills one long, deep breath, and a statue begins to rise, heavy and weightless at once. A god's knee clearing silt like a moon rising out of cloud. You hover until the confetti of sand settles, until the canal groove resumes its faint handwriting, until the water remembers its transparency. Your own body adopts the posture of the bay, softer shoulders, slower hands. The gentleness you practice tying your ambitious knot, now promoted to museum handling. The rope hums again. The hum pleases the part of you that still hears whales under basalt courtyards in the Azores and oarlocks keeping time under Aegean stars. On the ascent pause, neutrally buoyant. You count breaths and imagine drawers sliding in one for coins with Poseidon's trident that traveled far from Helic, one for antlers and flints lifted from North Sea trawls, one for papyrus that snows into flakes like sea salt, one for granite that learned how to live underwater without surrendering its calm. The city below is not gone. It has changed mediums, like a choir moving from nave to crypt and discovering the echo suits them. Your cheeks feel the faintest cyclonic cool around the line. Above, the boat is a gray-green ceiling. Below, Heracleion Thonis goes on breathing in a meter too slow to write down. You break the surface into compressor breath and tea-steam, the ordinary miracles of deck life. A crew hand passes you a cup that smells faintly of cinnamon, of course it does, and olives in wool, as if Athens had mailed a care package to the Delta. Your knot secures your mask strap to the rail because rituals are unity between places. The skipper nods. The nod that means we're all good here. Looking back at the square of water, you see nothing but gloss and a lazy wake folding itself flat. That's the point. Vanishing. Done kindly. leaves behind steadiness, not spectacle. As the barge idles and the bay resumes its paragraphing, you hold the rim of the cup and let warmth soak back into your hands, the way sun-soaked boards gave back heat on the pier. Somewhere a gull performs that surprised baby cry from your Aegean night. Somewhere a bell may be real. Maybe your traveling friend offers one true note and retires. The city below keeps breathing in its chosen medium. You keep learning the posture that suits it. Promise more than touch. Listen more than label. And let the story open and close with its own meticulous grace. Fog beads on your lashes until each blink feels like a tiny curtain rising, and you drift along black lava walls that lean into coves as if the island were cupping a secret. Whale song threads through the rock like warm wire, low and patient, a vibration you feel in your ribs before your ears admit anything at all. The air tastes like salt layered over basalt. With that familiar ribbon of cinnamon, your traveling rumor from Santorini sneaking in, as if it's stowed away in someone's pocket and refuses to disembark. The boat's hull gives one soft clonk, cousin to the Bimini tap and the Aegean oarlocks, and your breath takes up the old metronome, steady as a harbor clock that forgot urgency on purpose. A lookout on a headland, a Vigia in a white-walled hut, cups his hands and sends your skipper a sign. The bow turns slightly, and you feel the boat's small obedience like a cat standing and resettling its paws on a warm windowsill. On shore, basalt walls parcel vineyards into thousands of tight courtyards, Carré's little hotel rooms for grapes, each walled in by stone that gathers the day's heat and returns it like good gossip after sunset. You run your hand along a wall when you land for a moment, and the warmth in the rock finds the same part of your palm that remembered Bimini's honeycombed slabs and the knee of a granite god in green water. Patterns are lullabies, and the island likes humming yours back to you. Your steady fact for this shore arrives with lighthouse confidence. The Azores are a volcanic archipelago strung near the mid-Atlantic ridge. 9 islands that have practiced rising and cooling for millions of years. Pico, the dark cone that sometimes hides in its own scarf of cloud, is Portugal's highest point at over 2,000 meters, and the lava-walled vineyards along its coast, those carrés, form a UNESCO World Heritage landscape that proves people can teach grapes to love stone. Far offshore, the deep sound channel carries voices cleanly. Sperm whales favor these waters, and though Pico once launched open boats after them, Portugal ended whaling in the 1980s, turning lookouts and launches into whale watchers' binoculars, replacing harpoons like an elegant edit in the margin. The skipper throttles down near a notch of rock that acts like an amphitheater. The walls are porous and slick, sponge turned to stone, and the note that slides along them lingers in your chest like a bass thread in a lullaby. A whale lifts, the surface doming like dark glass rising to breathe, and then a fluke writes a parenthesis that closes without splash or complaint. Joke 1 arrives as politely as fog. If there were karaoke here, the whales would win every night, and you would volunteer to clap softly and hand out tea. The whales, merciful critics, decline to comment and keep the setlist tasteful. Historians still argue whether human feet touched these rocks before the Portuguese in the 15th century. Whether Norse sailors or other visitors reached the Azores earlier, as some sediment pollen and mouse DNA hints propose, or whether those signals are red herrings stirred by wind, ships, and time. They also debate who saw which island first in the 1420s. A navigator named Diogo de Silves, or another pilot whose name slid off the page like mist. The fog this morning takes that as staging direction thin enough to taste, thick enough to be interesting, and you let the questions drift past like sheer waters skimming a wave, close enough to notice, too graceful to chase. Back among the carrés, lichen writes pale script on the basalt. A farmer in a russet cap lifts a hand from between stone rooms, and you answer with the same small blessing you used for the crab in Aboukir, carry on. Expert, I'm just visiting. A try-works kettle from whaling days sits retired in a courtyard, black and quiet, honest iron owning its weight without insisting on its old job. When you rest your fingertips on its rim, it returns cool like the granite knee did, and your shoulders let go of a centimeter you didn't know you were still holding since the dive. You picture the edit from harpoon to binoculars, from boiling to watching, as a little bell in the town's mind, one tidy note and the culture changes key. A less attested tale walks up the lane, shaking rain from a shawl on certain fog-choked festas. Islanders say, when church bells pull long bronze vowels through thick air, a pod of whales surfaces just offshore and bows to the peal, lifting and sinking as if they approve of the rhythm section. Charming, unverified, you label it. But the fog today behaves like a bell muffler, and the bay is a good listener. So you set the story in your maybe cabinet beside cinnamon wind, chiming marsh reeds, and the paper town that snuck onto a map and into reality. You duck into a lava tube where the air turns cool and smells faintly of iron and damp leaf. The rock's skin is glossy, like poured chocolate arrested mid-gloss, and your headlamp performs that favorite ripple, the tiny tide your bedside lamp taught it, now gilding basalt instead of parchment. At the mouth of the tube, wash after wash laces itself white on black, an embroidered hem that unpicks itself with excellent manners. Joke 2 shows up wearing a hood, your rain jacket, one size too generous, qualifies as an ambitious poncho, and you declare it haute couture. The shearwater perched on a pipe organ outcrop considers the statement and offers a squeak that could be either skepticism or applause. Back on the boat, the Vigia flicks a different sign from his hill. The skipper taps the wheel twice helmsman's ritual from the Cyclades, alive and well in the Atlantic, and you cruise towards São Jorge, a long green-backed book whose cliff pages fall into water. At the base, fahines spread low platforms made by old landslides and lava tongues microclimates where bananas and coffee once tried their luck, and sometimes still do. Proof that rocks can learn hospitality. The air tastes like parsley and fern braided into salt. Your chest loosens the way it did when the canal groove in Heracleion remembered its job under silt. Some nerves unlearning to chatter. Your mainstream fact nods again from the headland. The old whale spotting system used these vigias, white cubes with slit windows and flare signals or flags to direct open boats. Today, they radio sightings to watchers instead. a clean repurposing of attention that feels like a librarian shushing chaos into story. On the slope above the harbor, a small museum keeps a harpoon head in a case not to celebrate it, but to keep the story honest. A viola da terra leans nearby, twin hearts of string, ready to ring the room awake if requested, though your preference is an underrating hush and a kettle-sized note. You remember the chart table that sighed after rethinking coastlines and smile at how many maps sit in one place, the lookout's practice sketch of miles, the vineyard lattice of heat and shade, the island outline curling in fog. The undersea topography whales read with their whole bodies like braille. Historians still argue whether medieval Portolan hints that dot the mid-Atlantic are genuine Azores sightings or cartographic wishful thinking that later found rock to justify ink, and whether Roman or Carthaginian currents could have swung a ship close enough for a name without a record. You let the debate circle without hooking, a pod that chooses its own course. A whale surfaces farther off and exhales. The sound is a kettle ghost. The puff of your flume's paddles slowed to one breath, and you feel the note roll down the basalt and into the carrés as if stone had a chest cavity. You set your palm on the gunwale. The boat answers with the old clonk, and your ambitious knot, now comfortably tenured, sits on a coil by your foot like a well-behaved cat. Joke 3 arrives with a clipboard you award the whale's adjuncts in acoustics and promise to design a fair tenure process for anyone who can move fog with a bass line. The whales accept the honorary title by continuing to be whales. Fog loosens. Pico shows the top of its cone in a cameo. Nobody makes it pose. A guide points upslope and names craters like cousins. Another points seaward and names currents like streets. You put both sets of names in your pocket. Old map and new map folding together without a crease. In a courtyard tasting room, glasses catch squares of light and turn them into warmth on your tongue. Mineral. A little salt. The memory of stone remembering sun. Even your jokes grow softer in here, because some rooms prefer a lowercase laugh. You return to the quay in late light, and a coil of rope waits for a job like a student waits for roll call. You lift it, and your hands tie the signature loop you've been practicing since Crete without thinking. The movement as natural as breathing, and just as kindly. The line snugs, the boat stills. The water erases your wake before you can decide which direction it came from. A small bell from the chapel on the rise offers one precise note and retires, satisfied with its punctuation. The island has tuned itself to a lower register work, repurposed. Walls teaching warmth, whales writing footnotes in mist, and you tune yourself to match. A dial turned from click to hum. As evening leans in, the basalt remembers every footstep and gives the heat back evenly. No favorites. Your eyes practice half-closed seeing, the way they did in Plato's room when the lamp traced a tide over papyrus. You lean on the wall and listen for drawers sliding, not in libraries now, but in old lives, wailing gone quiet, vine work steady, vigias reinvented, and the lesson is exactly your size. The world is allowed to change its tools and keep its pulse. A last puff from offshore lays a strip of silver along the water like a bookmark. And you take that as permission to save the page and move on whole. By morning, you are back in a softer sea, the color of tarnished silver, where sunlight still thinks about waking. A sandbar lifts its pale shoulder, and a strip of Peloponnesian coast idles in a heat haze that smells like thyme and sun-warmed rope. You slip into the water so quietly that even your ambitious knot on the painter rope seems to whisper encouragement. The surface folds over your back in one smooth sheet, and the old metronome returns gentle as the fan in your room that first practiced being ocean. Your mask cools your cheeks. Your breath hums, and the sandy bottom drifts nearer until patterns sharpen into edges and then into something more deliberate than wave work. Stones appear that have been told where to be a line that behaves like a curb, a rectangle with a doorway's intention, a path that prefers one direction to the other. You skim a palm over a slab and feel the warmth the sun has loaned it through the thin water. It's the same spot in your hand that kept the heat of Pico's basalt walls, that remembered the honeycomb of Bimini's beach rock, that greeted the granite knee in Heracleion. Patterns are lullabies. Your body is fluent in this one now. A small fish, the color of old brass, escorts you with the managerial calm of a librarian who has decided to tolerate your enthusiasm as long as you do not rearrange the shelves. Your steady fact swims up with textbook poise off southern Laconia, near the islet of Elefonisos. Lies Pavlopetri, one of the oldest known submerged towns yet mapped, discovered in 1967 and surveyed soon after, then reread by teams in the 2000s with side scan, multi-beam, and clever 3D imaging to chart streets, courtyards, and rooms laid out in a Bronze Age grammar from roughly the 3rd to the early 2nd millennium BCE. You pass over a junction that looks every inch an ancient corner lane meets lane. A threshold leads inward, and your chest loosens with that odd relief you felt when the canal groove in Heracleion still knew how to carry a current. The city under you is not performing ruin. It is performing memory. You fine along what locals call the avenue, shallow enough that sun writes lace across the paving. Your shadow joins you, a second traveler with perfect posture. Joke one arrives like a passing ripple somewhere. A very patient official is still stamping clay tablets for the underwater zoning office. Approved. Approved. Mind the threshold, while a crab with strong opinions runs the permitting desk. The crab declines comment, but raises a sand eyebrow. You pass a scatter of amphorae mouths glazed with lime, and think of your not tea jar back in the lab layers behaving, slip settling, and love how even potsherds learn to nap once promoted to seabed. Historians still argue whether Pavlopetri slid underwater in a few sharp episodes, earthquakes coupled with local subsidence and Bronze Age sea level changes, or whether the loss was a series of smaller drownings softened by time. They also debate the town's role in the broader palatial web, whether it was a modest coastal hub weaving nearby villages together, or a busier node flickering on and off the trade map like a patient lighthouse. You let the arguments move forward and back with the swell, the way you let the Aegean oarlocks thock and rest. The sea edits impatience with a very tidy desk. A less attested shoreline tail drifts over the sand like a shadow some evenings. Old fishers say, when the wind goes glassy, you can hear a flute from under the bay, a slow tune that might be current in the eelgrass, or might be a shepherd's practice looping through water from far off. or might be the place humming to itself about a festival it remembers. Charming, unverified, you label it. But the eelgrass does seem to write cursive when the breeze pauses, and your ears have been trained by whales and bells to welcome a good maybe. You tuck the story into the same cabinet that holds cinnamon wind and chiming marsh reeds, and its drawer closes without a click. You hover over a tidy rectangle that reads like a house in planned central room. Smaller rooms gathered along one edge. A courtyard suggestion with a line you want to call a drain because it behaves like one. Your fingertip skims the sand and finds the faintest ridge where people once preferred to step. It's the same preference your own feet showed on the deck rail around Crete when you learned to listen with ankles. Joke 2 bubbles up. If Bronze Age architects had a customer support line, you would call to compliment the clarity. Hello. Yes. Threshold still thresholding. Courtyard still being very courtyard. And the architect would put you on hold with pleasant lyre music, while a fish answers your survey with indifferent elegance. A wave flips your mind back to maps, and you think of High Brazil and Freiland, the brave wrong islands that tried on shapes until corrected. Pavlopetri feels like the opposite, a right thing that briefly tried on disappearance and then allowed itself to be coaxed back onto the page by sonar, divers, and patience. You picture the chart table sighing in satisfaction. The sea's little punctuation happens on cue. The boat above gives one polite clonk, a cousin of the Bimini hull and the Azores gunnel, and your breath perfectly fits the measure. You follow a low wall into a broader space and find stones aligned as if to slow a cart or to guide feet into a calmer pool. The water here warms by a degree, a gentleness you could believe was a bath if you were allowed to be sentimental on duty. A school of Salema mills at the edge, like audience members choosing seats. A child on shore laughs one clear note, and you remember the grandmother in Akrotiri tying a jar to a donkey with professional serenity. The jar, the donkey, the laugh, tiny index cards in your head's pinnakeys. Cross-referenced now with lane, threshold, courtyard, bath. The mainstream pulses again. Late surveys found textiles weights, stone anchors, and domestic bits that make this less palace and more people work. Cooking, washing, the soft arithmetic of ordinary days. You hover above a narrow slot where the current ticks faster and imagine water hauling gossip through alleys, the way it does in Alexandria between stacks. Even here, in 5 hand spans of depth, the city continues to carry and sort. Your shoulders let go of a millimeter you didn't know you were guarding since the lava tube's gloss. Historians still argue whether the gridding here reflects a planned town from an early era or a long accumulation of practical wisdom. Add a room, mend a corner, correct a line. They also argue how much of what you see is original footprint and how much is reveal and rearrangement by storms and divers' well-meant tidying. You are not here to referee. You are here to practice that soft kind of looking that lets a place finish a sentence in its own grammar. The Critias broke off mid-thought. Pavlopetri feels like a continuation written in water. You angle toward the shallows where wavelets turn your shadow into a ribbon, and Joke 3 tugs gently at your fin strap. Your snorkel is still not a straw. even when the water looks like mint tea. You grant yourself one imaginary sip and promise the sea you will keep the beverage service on deck. A shell winks opalescent from a crack, and you do not pocket it, because promises are boats you choose to keep floating. Nearby, a cluster of stones forms a small triangle that insists on being a hearth, and the thought makes your chest warm the way the Triworks kettle cooled your hand. A breeze arrives and whitens the surface in tiny claws. The sun lifts above the low headland and slides into your mask in a line of gold. You drift back toward the skiff and surface beside the stern. Hands on smooth, tar-touched wood. The smell of rope and plank sends a callback through you like a bell string harbors and piers, and that single true note that has punctuated each room. You hand up your fins. Loop your mask strap into your signature knot, still ambitious, now dignified, and feel the day decide to be generous. On deck, the boards breathe out last night's heat and become pleasantly warm under your calves, just as the pier will be when you sit there later. The world loves a motif and is considerate enough to rehearse it. You look back at water so clear it might as well be memory. The lanes below now only whispers where light writes and erases Bimini's lesson repeating. Yonaguni's steps nodding hello. The eye's rings blinking under noon. Helix Meadow folding into quiet. Doggerland waiting forever. You sip something cool that tastes faintly of thyme and salt, and think of your not tea jar asleep in its order. You will set it beside a stone tonight and listen for drawers sliding the way you have learned to do. The outboard coughs, then settles. The bow turns toward a quiet harbor you've never seen and somehow recognize. A bell somewhere down shore gives a single, punctual note. It is, as usual, enough. You lie back against a coiled line with the contentment of a cat in Alexandria after audit hours and watch gulls write soft check marks over the bay. The day agrees to carry itself for a while. By the time the skiff noses into the pier's shade, your shoulders have lowered to the correct altitude for sleep, and the boards are ready to teach you the last lesson they know. You sit at the night's edge like a pier, boards warm from a day you didn't have to carry, breathing out stored sun into your palms the same way Bimini's stones lent you heat. Yonaguni's steps steadied your fingers, and that granite knee in green water answered your hello with cool. The harbor air is briny with a pinch of cedar, and because your life now includes running gags, a ribbon of contraband cinnamon wanders by like a friendly rumor that refuses to check out of the story. Far down the quay, a bell gives one true note your faithful punctuation, and then the hush finishes the sentence in ink as dark as the tide. Moonlight combs a long stitch across the surface. The thread tightens, loosens, tightens again, practicing the metronome you learned from patient donkeys in Athens, from oarlocks thocking their tidy rhythm among the Cyclades, from the Bimini hull's soft clonk, from the lab flume's paddles steadier than any plot. You draw your knees in and touch the coil beside you. Your ambitious knot sits there like a small talisman of competence, promoted from abstract to signature by sheer persistence. Joke one arrives, mild and honest, if there were a merit badge for knot that mostly minds its business. Yours would feature a grouper stamping approved with its very serious lips. Somewhere out in the dark, something exhales, vast and kind, and basalt courtyards in the Azores wake up in your ribs, whales threading song through stone rooms, and you consider adding adjunct acoustics to their resumes before remembering that whales don't do LinkedIn. The sea, a merciful critic, sends back a gentle lift that rocks the boards into agreement. You roll a familiar stone in your palm, the chalky oval from the eye of the Sahara, and it remembers noon the way the pier remembers afternoon, passing warmth to your skin like a secret handshake from geology. Not far from where you sit, some coasts love to sit near their neighbors. In history, this sea holds another town that learned to breathe underwater, Pavlopetri. Bronze Age streets and courtyards mapped first in 1967 and again with careful digital eyes decades later. A community that stepped into water and kept living as lines. That confidence steadies you, because tonight is less about dazzling answers and more about posture. How to sit with vanishings without tugging. Your jar from the lab labeled "not tea with midnight honesty" waits by your heel. The layers are asleep in their best order course spin down, fine on top. An essay in gravity that politely edits your urge to stir. Historians still argue whether the wide unfastening around 1200 BCE, the late Bronze Age collapse that unstitched palaces and trade routes from Greece to the Levant, was mostly drought and crop failure, a chain of earthquakes that made Helix Night look like a rehearsal, internal unrest, migrating groups the Egyptians later carved as sea peoples, or a braid of all of these catching on itself. One mainstream touchstone stands like a lighthouse in that fog at Medinet Habu in Egypt. The temple reliefs of Ramesses III depict battles with seaborne enemies around 1177 BCE, a carved memory of ships, shields, and a state trying not to be unmade. The debate moves like surf around pilings push, pull, repeat, and the pilings do what timbers do, best host the argument without splintering. A less attested whisper borrows your ear the way cinnamon scents borrow your nostrils near the marshes of Doñana in Spain. Some fishers say that on very still nights, far inland, you can hear the bells of Tartessos ring under the soil, a drowned city or a swallowed shore, exhaling history through bronze. Charming, unverified. You label it, but the way the air carries sound across flat water makes it easy to loan the legend a respectful nod and a seat at the edge of your maybe cabinet. Somewhere between the marsh reeds chiming and Bimini's wandering fireflies, you turn the stone once, twice, and lay it beside the jar like a moon and a planet in a private solar system. Joke two pads in softly if the universe needs an intern to dust its rings. You are available evenings, paid in olives and interesting maps. The night accepts your application and answers with a faint cluck under the pier. The cousin of your favorite clonk and a gull adds that surprised baby cry you first heard off the Aegean, the one that made you look up and grin into a dark that was already smiling. You think of maps now, the brave, wrong islands that tried on shapes and bowed out when the ocean took attendance. Hi Brazil, Fryland, Sandy Island cartographic cameos that taught us how to delete with courtesy. If there were a course called Cartographic Apologies, you would audit it forever. submitting weekly reflections titled On Being Fond of Fictional Rocks. Meanwhile, the sky above the real rocks does its patient job. Stars write unhurried cursive you can almost read. And for once, you keep your finger off the page because the page is cold and the lesson is to trust. Your breath lengthens, and with it comes the Nile's iron tang, braided into ocean salt, the same recipe that kissed your regulator hose in Aboukir Bay when Heracleon's godly knees and harbor grooves reminded you that cities can switch mediums and keep breathing. The pier planks turn into pages under your palm. You can almost hear a reed pen scratch a courteous conclusion in the next room. Athens, olives, wax, a soft laugh. Then the sentence decides to trail into an ellipsis because the Critias broke off mid-thought, and you forgive it again. Endings, you've learned, are best when they feel like a drawer sliding in without a click. A boat glides in with the diplomacy of someone arriving late but bringing cake. A deckhand loops a line around a cleat with a knot so ordinary you thrill to it as if it were a comet. Water erases the wake before you can pick a direction. You retie your own coil purely for pleasure. Your ambitious signature, now a habit with excellent bedside manner. Joke 3 stretches. Yawns if sleep had a lab. Not tying would be the practicum hands moving. Mind slowing. Results arriving without exam anxiety. And the lab cat in Alexandria would sign your checkout slip with a paw smudge of approval. You lift the not tea jar to the moon. Tilt just enough to watch the slip slide like a miniature tide, and then let it set back down like a cat deciding, once again, that your lap is the right answer. You do not open it. You do not stir. Promising, not puncturing, has been the craft all along. Across the water, a slow light moves someone practicing the ancient art of getting from A to B by keeping their pulse kind, and you can feel your shoulders notch down another half centimeter toward human. Historians still argue whether the Donyana Marsh geometry's faint circles and lines that satellites sometimes sketch under drought belong to Tartessos, to later Roman salterns, or mostly to nature's own tidy rearrangements. You let that debate flow around you like the lagoon at Helice flowed back into Meadow, deciding to give the argument the same gift you gave the ocean stares and the ringed desert patient attention without verdict. The night approves by quietly becoming more night. You listen for your catalog of soft instructors, the donkey's clop, the oarlock's thock, the parrotfish carpenters ticking coral into beaches by the spoon, the turtle's seminar on naps, the grouper's security stamp, the librarian cat's disdainful purr, and discover they have all resolved into one larger music you don't need to parse. A buoy knocks once, true as ever. The tide noses the ladder rung, tests your shoe, withdraws with excellent manners. You breathe in, a little longer than usual. You breathe out, a little longer than that, and the harbor folds you into its attendance list under the heading Professional Staring at Water. Tenure pending. The drawer slides in. No click. You let the pictures soften the way fog ghosted the shoreline earlier tonight. The lamp's ripple, the map's freckles, the ringed desert, the honeycomb stones, the terraces under green-blue hush, until they become the ordinary gleam of well-worn boards. The bell offers one last syllable and agrees to be a clock in another room. Your hands go still over your knot. Your eyes learn the trick of half closed. When stray thoughts arrive, you let them step onto the pier, look at the water, and decide on their own to keep walking down the dock until they become indistinguishable from night. The room you are in remembers how to take care of itself. You are already where you need to be. Sleep doesn't ask. It offers. You nod back with the courtesy you've been practicing across seas and maps and centuries, and you feel, with the patience of geology, your weight settle into wood that is absolutely strong enough to hold it. Let your breath lengthen the way a wave lengthens when it remembers the shore is generous. Let it come in soft, like felt, and go out softer, like velvet. Each exhale a ribbon that lays itself neatly on the harbor without needing to be arranged. The boards beneath you are steady, quietly warm from the day they carried and are happy to give away now. And your shoulders accept that warmth the way a page accepts a margin note without fuss. Simply there, the night decides to dim by half a shade, and the stars step back to a comfortable arm's length. Not gone, just farther, like candles moved to the mantel, so their glow can be a room and not a task. The bell you've been carrying no louder than a fingertip on glass moves to the far end of the pier and rests there, dependable, unurgent. One gentle syllable that says nothing needs your signature anymore. Let the pictures soften until they're only textures, the cool of stone you once touched, the hush of sandbars under thin water, the rustle of reeds where frogs tuned the air, the slow hum of whales where basalt kept their notes safe, the faint cinnamon that slipped into evenings because stories like a spice to travel with. None of it asks to be held. All of it knows how to wait. If a thought comes up with a list, let the list unwrite itself, line by line, the way wave edges erase their own punctuation. Your hands, which have tied enough tonight, are allowed to be still. Your jaw loosens the way a drawer closes when it has been planed to fit perfectly. No click, only that soft slide you've learned to trust. Feel the room around you begin to behave like a harbor fan, a tide, window a moon, pillow a quiet key. You can lean here. You can drowse here. You can slip from the edge into the middle without moving at all. The lamp's ripple, practiced for so long, finally becomes the tide it has been imitating, and the tide becomes the breath you already have, and the breath becomes sleep beginning.